you could command the sky to surrender all its power. And I bet you don't know what to do with it, do you?
Oh, you're right. They do say command the skies a lot.
Command the sky.
What does that mean?
It's said way too often, right? And
Yeah.
when you look at all of these pieces together, then you're like, oh shit. Last but not least, or at least that's what I did. Welcome back to the Book on Fantasy podcast.
I'm Addison.
I'm Lorraine, and we are two best friends who explore the world of fantasy through book, shows, and movies, but with a heavy emphasis on books. Okay, so I feel like, man, everything that happened, we had another set of very jaw-dropping, just info dumps, action sequences, and I was like, it's crazy.
I was here for the action. I like how it started out really good, but then every chapter I was like, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit. It got progressively worse as it went on. We started on a really high note and ended on a like, uh-oh.
I can't even believe Holden.
Who cares about Holden? What about Xaden?
Well, that too. There was just, okay, see, yeah, there's too many things happening with everybody in this set of chapters. Yeah. Anyways, crazy. We're going to talk all about it. But before we get into all that, spoiler warning, we are a spoiler-free podcast. We have only read up to the chapters we are covering and no further. So we have no idea what's to come in the rest of the book. With that being said, we will be discussing chapters 25 through 28 specifically, but it is likely that references to the previous chapters as well as Fourth Wing and Iron Flame will come up as well. If you are not caught up, then definitely stop here and then come back when you are. Furthermore, we would like to remind everyone that this is an adult podcast where we will have adult conversations. Explicit language or potentially triggering topics may be discussed, so please be mindful of that and adjust accordingly. Housekeeping. If you are reading along with us, then next week's episode will cover chapters 29 through 33. And as a quick note, we meant to do through 29 this week, but we started typing out our notes. We had so many thoughts and we're like, nah, we need to cut a chapter. This is getting way too long.
Yeah, we know our episodes run a little long, but this is the difference between like 2.5 hours to like 3.5. And that's just too much of a good thing.
If you read through 29, you're ahead of the game. And second, if you are a fan of our Onyx Storm coverage, then the very best way for you to support us is to leave us a review and share it with a friend who loves the Empyrean series as well. Obviously, we love hearing from you guys. If anybody has any crazy theories to present that you'd like to share with us, and if we like it, we will definitely shout you out and share it on the podcast, or just any reactions to any of our ideas. Like, are we on track?
Are they
something
bad?
not tracking? Is it way too crazy and wild? I don't know. But yeah, just let us know. And that's all for housekeeping. So let's get into the episode. We will start with the book report, where Addison will summarize each chapter. Next, we will convene a meeting of the assembly, where we will deep dive, analyze, and theorize each chapter. And finally, to end the episode, we will share our favorite moments from the set of chapters discussed. With that being said, Addison, please give us the book report.
Happily. Chapter 25. Violet abandons her towel and her common sense, and things get steamy. But not from the hot bath Violet just took or the humid climate. Oh no. It's all intense heat and passion between Violet and Xaden. Because there isn't any magic, Xaden doesn't have to worry about losing control, and boy, do they take advantage. R.I.P. breakfast table. Before they can go for round 2, they are interrupted by Riddick. Kat? Dane? Mira? Turns out the whole squad was waiting outside the door while Xaden and Violet. Anyways, Dane tells Xaden that they need his help because King Courtland has decided to keep Halden. Too fucking bad for Halden. Just kidding. Well, sort of. Violet tells Xaden they have to go get him. Boo! Chapter 26. Violet and Xaden head to King Courtland's palace, but before they can enter, they are stopped by several guards who, despite living in a weaponless society, are armed. They attempt to deny them entrance until Xaden announces he's a Duke of Tyrandor and Violet is his consort? Oh, they will definitely be having words about that later. They are granted entrance and are greeted by a young King Courtland. The pleasantries lasted for approximately 4 seconds before Violet asks Halden what the hell he did. After that, things quickly get out of hand. Courtland reveals that Halden tried to bargain with the Blade of Erasure, which technically isn't his to give away. Not only that, but he ordered his personal guard, Anna Windshire, to go into the Deverelli vaults and steal Hey, where is Anna anyways? I'll tell you where she is. Or at least where her head is, about to be served to Cortland's White Panthers. This prompts another outburst from Halden. Xaden tries to intervene, but it was too late. The damage was done. Cortland ordered his guards to kill them all. Chapter 27. Sometimes diplomacy is best served at sword point, and if that isn't a self-fulfilling prophecy, I don't know what is. All hell has broken loose, and the melee begins. Violet does a good job of holding her own, but gets injured in the process. This enrages Xaden, and he transforms into Vaden. I can't help myself. That's how I think about, I'm like, am I talking to Xaden or Vaden? You know, which one?
Darth Vaden.
Darth Vaden. No, literally. Xaden drains the power out of the alloy from Violet's shattered conduit and kills a dozen guards using his shadows. Everyone is stunned. The fighting ceases immediately, and Violet's brilliant scribe mind goes into overdrive. She had Xaden hide his eyes, which also just so happened to look like he was showing remorse, and reopens negotiations with Cortland. She negotiates for Xaden's pardon and safe return and sends him back to Erasure with Sigale. Darna has playtime with Shira, one of the Cortland's little ones. Violet's negotiations are successful, and they get everything they want in exchange for the Emilian citrine and Darna's eggshell. Chapter 28. Back in Battle Brief, Violet gives the squad a breakdown of everything that happened in Death Valley, but gets interrupted when Riddick, good thing I fuck like a third-year Gamlin, flirts with a flyer from Zigneeson.
I love that line.
That's I know. So I took a page out of your book when you were like, Taryn, I'm not a horse or not. That's what inspired me. Okay. Flirts with a flyer from Zigneeson, and Devera busts them for talking amongst themselves during class. Whoops. She asks Violet to analyze the change of strategy the Venons seem to be making. Her conclusion, they somehow know about the Eurasian wards, and they're moving into position for the inevitability of them falling. Another week passes in a blur of classes, training, wielding, lifting weights with Imogen, and preparing for their trip to Unbriel. The squad discusses the Unbriel trip, but they are interrupted when the first years arrive. They want to help. In fact, they insist. Violet eventually relents and also learns that Sloane is refusing to train her signets because she is worried it's too destructive. The squad is back to arguing about the best route to take between the aisles, but are interrupted again by the arrival of Xaden. Violet is relieved to see Xaden until she notices the gold flecks in those beautiful onyx eyes are now no longer gold, but amber. This discovery leaves Violet reeling, so she decides to fuck the rules. They will leave for Unbriel, but will not be returning in between visits to debrief the scenarium. Bodhi asks Violet why the sudden urgency, and she tells him about Xaden's eyes, and he agrees they need to go and go fast. But then they are interrupted again. A lot of interrupting in this chapter. When a second year on the map begins to channel in the middle of signet sparring, before Violet could even think, Professor Carr stabbed them with an alloy dagger. And that concludes the book report.
Wow. Crazy.
Crazy. Did not end on a good note for anybody there.
Yeah, definitely not. But thank you for that excellent book report. And now let's get our assembly meeting started. And of course, we always have some overarching thoughts to share.
I know, but in another surprising plot twist, not just in the book, but in this episode, Lorraine had the more overarching thoughts than I did.
Oh.
So
yeah,
she did. She had big feels about this. And so we'll talk about it. I guess I had a response to Lorraine, but my main overarching thought was that we have so many thoughts about this set of chapters, we do not have any time to waste, so we need to get into it.
And then I said something contrary to how I normally operate. I was like, this is going to be the time where I share a lot of thoughts today. So
we're role reversing today, okay?
Anyways, this was all sparked by, I think, mostly brain fatigue. I hit my breaking point with the amount of thinking I was doing in this set of chapters. And I think I was just feeling overwhelmed when I wrote this. I felt better today, probably because, I slept.
Snack and a nap, baby. Yeah, that's all you need, snack and a nap.
So things are fine now, and I don't feel as strongly about everything as I did before. But actually, I do think this is a good discussion point to bring up. I want to be super clear that I do really, really enjoy the Empyrean series, and so far I have enjoyed Onyx Storm as well. But there's been some circulating criticism about the book from people saying that they felt it was very confusing and pretty hard to follow, particularly in Onyx Storm. They didn't necessarily feel that way about Fourth Wing and Iron Flame, but going into this book, it felt much more overwhelming. And to be honest, I kind of understand that. For as closely as we read these books in order to outline our thoughts and notes, I still find myself having to go back and reread chapters, reread paragraphs, reread just dialogue or like just background context sometimes because there's so much going on. Or I'll be like, Addison, did you read this the same way I did? Because to be honest, there's a lot of stuff that is just kind of confusing to read, or there's some ambiguity about how you could interpret what was going on. And sometimes that's intentional. But I think ultimately there are just so many details about so many different things that I can understand why people feel overwhelmed. It has nothing to do with anyone's intelligence or experience with reading fantasy necessarily. You have all these different subplots involving continental and world history. You have several types of magic that are introduced in this book. You have all this lore about the origin of the venom, lore about the gods and goddesses, information about dragon breeds and their whole hierarchy. You have riders and signet powers, which of course are like ever changing. And then on top of that, have to deal with all of the political nuance that exists between kingdoms, provinces, and then also just like the military. So there is a lot of information that you are needing to digest as you're reading these books. And then on top of the subplots, you also have to work through many different formats that give you all this information and these critical details because you're looking at character dialogue, which comes both as spoken out loud form and also as all these mental conversations that are going on between Violet and her dragons, or like Violet with Xaden. Then you have the excerpts. And so honestly, it's a little crazy to think that one singular person can remember everything that happens.
Oh my God, seriously. How does she keep it straight?
I don't know. Anyways, all of that being said, sometimes it gets to a point where I'm just mentally exhausted reading 3 to 4 chapters of this book. In the end, I hope that all of this pays off and the book is worth it in terms of how it all comes together. I figure Rebecca Yarros has a plan for why things are the way that they are, but sometimes I'm a little bit like, is it unnecessarily complicated, or I don't know. So those are my thoughts at this point.
Yeah, no, I'm really glad you shared that. I think that it's good to have these conversations about the overarching book as we progress, because sometimes like Ryan and I are doing this and we're like, are we the only ones who think this way? And so sometimes it's nice to hear, oh, I'm not the only one struggling. Because sometimes I'm like, am I just dumb? Like, is that just what it is?
Right.
Like everyone else is blowing through this and I'm just like,
struggling, having a hard time. Yeah.
So I think we're kind of at the point in the book where it's a little bit of trust the process. I did see, I think in an interview with Rebecca, where she's had the last line of this book planned since she started writing Fourth Wing. And so I'm just going to trust in Rebecca and that, she's going to get us where we need to go. Don't get me wrong. We're all for complex world building and all the layers and hidden meanings are really fun. But I do feel, as Lorraine said, we're kind of at a tipping point where it's like, this is a little too much of a good thing. There's a little too much detective work. But this conversation was prompted between the two of us because there was a Reddit thread going on. No spoilers, but just about the book overall. And several people pointed out something that I thought was really relevant to this conversation. And that's that Rebecca Yarros has almost no exposition in this book. So I had to put on my high school English hat for this. Exposition means a comprehensive description and explanation of an idea or theory. It's a necessary tool for authors to make sure that readers understand what's happening in the story. It's sort of like when you watch a TV show and at the beginning they always do a previously on, and it reminds you of what the fuck happened in the last episode or season. And authors do this too, but sometimes it can be a beast to work in organically. Like it's hard to make it
right.
Well, it's hard to fit it in. So some authors are great at it, some are not. And a lot of times the exposition happens when two characters are having a conversation and the character will literally be like, so let me get this straight. You're saying that a long time ago, a witch put a curse on the kingdom and only the princess can lift it. La 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 la. They like spell out what's happening, everything that you're supposed to have gleaned up into that point in the book. And I feel that comment really helps solidify this reason of like, why am I having trouble? There needs to be like an explicit conversation where Violet's like ranting to Xaden and she's like, there's just so much going on. I'm worrying about the Eurasian wars and I'm worrying about X, Y, and Z. And she kind of like lists out and you're like, okay, this is what I'm supposed to be focusing on. I think that exposition is needed to summarize and make it a little bit easier to follow and digest because it's a lot of information. It is a lot.
Right. Well, sometimes it feels like because this is not complete, there is a lot. Well, obviously, I love a good theory. I love to theorize on this.
Oh,
so
we know, Lorraine. We know.
That like to do that by any means. But because it's unfinished, there's so much to speculate on. And oftentimes, there are like a bunch of tiny details. They're like a couple words or like a sentence or a thought somebody has. And then all of a sudden, it becomes super important, or was this really relevant detail that supports a theory or supports this revelation that happens later. And so I think Rebecca Yarros also leaves a lot of room for ambiguity, because I guess the nature of the context is that there is so much history that was changed and so much that was not true. And so everybody's sitting here trying to piece together what's really happening and what's really going on. So I guess from that perspective, it explains why you're just sitting here being like, wait, all these theories. I don't know what's important, what's not important, so I'm just going to overanalyze everything. But yeah, I totally agree that she definitely has a plan. But in the meantime, it's just like,
we're struggling.
Yeah.
And as you're talking, I'm wondering if this is intentional because it makes us feel the way that Violet feels, right?
Yes.
Everything she knows, everything she's ever been taught, lie, disinformation, doesn't know who to trust, is confused, overwhelmed. And so maybe that's intentional and we're just supposed to feel the way Violet feels, because I imagine this is pretty close to how she feels, plus the added element of they could all die tomorrow, you know?
Yes.
I think ultimately the TLDR of this conversation is Rebecca got us too many times in Fourth Wing and Iron Flame. And so now we're applying that level of intensity. We're like, okay, we don't want to get God again. And
right.
So now we're working overtime.
Anyways, that wraps up our overarching thoughts, and now we'll get into the actual main analysis of our chapters, starting with Chapter 25. Of course, we have the excerpt. This was part of confiscated correspondence of Fen Ryerson to an unknown recipient. Fen essentially points to the idea that love in a marriage is useless. He views marriage as a quote-unquote necessary evil to secure the line, and love is best saved for his children.
Wow, where's the romance, man? No wonder Zaydenbaum left. I don't blame her. I bet he was fun to be married to.
Yeah, can you imagine? I don't know. Obviously, this leads to one of the things that we haven't really discussed yet, and in regards to Onyx Storm, is the situation with Xaden's mother. There's very little information in Fourth Wing and Iron Flame, but what we do know is this. In Chapter 58 of Iron Flame, Xaden tells Violet his mother left when he was 10. The marriage contract between her and Fen Ryerson stated an heir had to survive to the age of 10, and then she was free to go. She, of course, left, and he hadn't seen or heard from her since. Timeline-wise, this puts Xaden's mom leaving somewhere around 620-ish AU. We know nothing about where his brother was from or whether she is even still alive, but it's implied the marriage was purely to produce an heir at bare minimum. Knowing that the province of Tyrrendor has a reputation for cunning leadership, as is stated in Chapter 21's excerpt, I would also guess that the decision of whom Fen Ryerson would marry and produce an heir with was probably strategic as well. It low-key also makes me wonder if marriage contracts or connections were a part of the reason contact was kept between Tyrrendor and the Isle Kingdoms and Deverelli, because we see Tyrrendor clearly brokered a deal with Deverelli.
So are you saying that you think Xaden's mom might be from Deverelli, and then that Tyrrendor made a deal with Deverelli, and part of that was Fen Ryerson marrying Xaden's mom?
Not necessarily from Deverelli, but just like, because Deverelli likes to be in the middle. They like to be the middleman.
That's true. They broker deals.
Stuff. Yes.
True.
And so maybe they put together an arrangement between Tyrrendor and somewhere else, and they like facilitated that. I don't know. Again, this feeds into my little triangle about like Tyr's Rebellion, Second Crowland Uprising, Deverelli being involved with everything, and I'm speculating. So
yeah. Well, I think that tracks, because something I was thinking about is how we never hear about Xaden's mom's side of the family ever. We know that Fen Ryerson had a sister, and that's how we have Bodhi as a cousin. And so it would stand to reason that she has no family anywhere in the continent, because Xaden might mention, oh, my mom's brother, or maybe she didn't have any extended family. I don't know. But if they're in the Isle Kingdom, we know there's no contact. I mean, I think that supports that idea.
Yeah. Who knows?
Yeah. Well, overall, I agree with you. It seems highly likely based on the little bit of information we get from Xaden. in combination with this excerpt that the marriage was purely political. There was no love there. I, of course, like everyone else, want to know more about her, and I'm assuming we will find out more, possibly even in this book. Another question I just want to throw out into the void is, why didn't she and Fen have more children? With the heavy emphasis on continuing the line in this book, it seems really odd that they didn't have as many children as possible. Because it sounds like in this world, especially because the contract said they had to wait until the heir was 10, like a survivable age. Maybe infant mortality is a little high, so it seems kind of weird that Xaden doesn't have any siblings.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually, because the king of Navarre,
he had twins. He had three.
He has three, exactly, and now he only has two sons. But I mean, for that exact reason.
Exactly. No, seriously. And then to do due diligence of the podcast, I must also point out there is a moderately popular theory that Xaden's mother is Venin or related to the Venin in some way. To be honest, there's not a lot of evidence to support this theory because, as Lauren and I pointed out earlier, we know next to nothing about her. I personally disagree with this theory. I do not think his mom has any association with the Venin. I think it is much, much more likely that she was tired of being in a loveless marriage with Fen and just left as soon as she could. My spidey sense is telling me that she did love and care for Xaden and wanted to take him with her, but because he was the only heir to Tyrrendor, Fen obviously was not going to allow that to happen. I know that's been talked about quite a bit, especially because with all the mystery around Asher and Lilith and their relation to the Venin and what they know, it kind of opens the door for that. But I really don't think so.
I haven't really been super sold on the idea that his mom is Venin either.
Yeah.
But like everybody else, I have been curious about what actually happened to her. So hopefully we get it soon. So last episode, we were discussing the possibility of Xaden and Violet getting married. This is kind of contextually still in relation to this excerpt. At this point, I definitely think they will, especially after this set of chapters. But with that in mind, I wonder if this excerpt is also providing some light foreshadowing for that happening, I guess, sooner rather than later. Xaden has asked Violet to promise to look out for Tyrrendor since he got his title as Duke restored. And obviously, he knows he's Venin, and he wouldn't have asked Violet to do that if he didn't worry about his own ability to lead Tyrrendor in the future. Now, I think in their case, their marriage would truly be one of love, first and foremost, but it would make a lot of sense, I guess, from like a ruling perspective, because if they get married, Violet would have authority and decision-making power with respect to Tyrrendor, which is exemplified in chapter 26 when he names Violet his consort. And then we also see that Violet is quite good at navigating diplomatic relations and negotiating and all that, as is further evidenced by how she handles King Courtland in chapter 27. So, I'm leaning harder into the idea that I think they're going to get married.
Yeah. There's a lot of mentions or allusions to it now. It's kind of like, that feels intentional. I do think it's an interesting thought, and I agree that I feel like it's too much to ignore. My question would be, how does inheriting work? Is it if Violet and Xaden get married and Xaden dies or, whatever, is she automatically the Duchess of Tyrrendor, or does it have to pass from a bloodline? Because I know in some magical, or not even necessarily magical, but in monarchies, or I guess this isn't technically a monarch because he's not a king. Whatever, you get what I'm trying to say. Line of succession sometimes has to go to someone in the bloodline, so it can't go to a person who married into the family. So then it begs the question, what would happen if they got married and he died? Would it go to Violet? Maybe. And if not, then they could go to their children. But if they don't have any children, then it would go to the next person in the bloodline, which would then be Bodhi, I think.
That would make sense that it'd be Bodhi because Xaden has named Bodhi to take over in council and everything in his stead. How do you say that?
Stead.
Stead. So, so that implies to me that if anything happens to Xaden, Bodhi would be the next person to take over Tyrrendor.
I have two final thoughts to wrap up this excerpt. I'm just going to throw this out there. Is this possible foreshadowing that somehow Xaden will again be betrothed to or married to someone else as part of a necessary political alliance? We know the Duchess of Empyrean is vying for Xaden to marry one of her daughters, and he tells Violet that he's had at least a dozen other proposals sent this way. Now, let me just say, before you get your pitchforks out, totally fair. I'm just doing my due diligence of the podcast, okay? I don't think this is likely, especially because it wouldn't track with Zayden's character. Remember, he literally said, I live by you, Violet. He ain't going to get pushed into a political marriage. But again, doing my due diligence and pointing out the possibility of foreshadowing, right? That marriage is only a political tool. And maybe it's like he has to marry someone from the Isles to save Erasha. And Violet's like, just do it and we'll figure it out, right? I don't think that's where it's going to go, but someone's got to say it's going to be me, I guess.
Fair, yeah. Yeah, that's fair.
Finally, the last line of the excerpt, save love for your children, really got me thinking about Xaden's relationship with his father. We really don't know a lot about their relationship, and we really just get bits and pieces here and there. But I do think it's safe to say that Fen loves Xaden and vice versa. I mentioned this in a previous episode when Violet gets her father's research and Xaden says something to the effect of, if my father had left me a letter, ... implying it would be really meaningful for him. I do hope Xaden gets some kind of closure with his father, even, man, I wrote this word and I knew I should have picked a different one. Posthumously? Posthumously?
My inclination is to read it posthumously, but I don't think
that's not quite right. I think it's posthumously. Well, whatever. Post his death. You guys know what I'm trying to say.
I agree that he definitely loved his father and his father loved him. His father was like his main parental figure, obviously.
He's his only support system, really.
Yeah. I don't know. Fen so far has not pulled a Papa Sorrengail and left Xaden with anything.
Unfortunately.
Anyways, to move on from the excerpt, we jump right into a full-on spicy scene with Violet and Xaden, and I couldn't be happier for them. Yay!
Or happier for myself.
Bookmark this chapter, everybody. Per usual, I won't be going into details of the spice because that is for y'all to enjoy on your own time. But there are some general points to discuss about what happens, so.
I didn't think I was going to have very many notes for this because I was just like, oh yeah, finally. But I actually had a surprising amount of thoughts about this. So, first of all, I just thought the scene was the perfect combination of hilarious and hot. When Violet looks around, is worried someone might see them, and Xaden is like, no one can see at this angle. I checked. Don't worry. It's so funny to think about. I imagine him sort of acting it out and being like, yep, my height versus Violet's height, the height of the table. Yep, I think we're all good here. And then he just runs to the bathroom to get Violet.
He was ready. He had this plan and ready to go.
He was ready. Okay. I was also screaming at the top of my lungs when Violet stops Xaden and she's all like, don't tease me. I'm really trying to respect the whole no sex aspect of the rules we laid down. And Xaden fucking smirks. Why is that the hottest thing? I don't know. It's like a thing. And I love that. I'm sorry. That's never going to get old for me. I was like, Zaddy's back. Apparently, Violet feels the same way that I do because she thinks, and I debate going back to the throwing daggers at his head stage of our relationship, which, to be honest, was also hilarious for me. I don't blame her, Something else I loved about the scene in general was that even though Violet and Xaden are in a well-established relationship and they are clearly comfortable in their sexual relationship, there is still a conversation about consent. And I think that's something that should be highlighted more. Oftentimes, consent gets painted in the light of only needed if it's someone you've never had a sexual relationship with. But consent is a constant need in any relationship, whether you're newly dating or have been married for 25 years. And I like that Rebecca shows that in this scene.
Yeah, that's a good point. I like that too. As far as other things going on, I really liked when Violet reassures Xaden, I know who you are, in response to him asking if she was sure since she knew what he is. This is still a point that can't be ignored. We don't know what the point of no return, so to speak, is for Venin, but I truly believe that at his core, Xaden is not bad or evil, and his reasons for turning in the first place were obviously out of concern for Violet and the rest of the continent. And I think Violet reminding Xaden that she still sees his soul and who he is as a person is going to be important as they continue on this Vaden journey, I guess.
Make Vaden stick, okay?
Yeah. Xaden himself also seems to rely on his love for Violet to ground him in a way, and Violet notes that he kisses her like he's searching for his own soul. I do strongly feel that love as a concept is going to play a prominent role in either preventing him from turning further, or maybe something involving love will be connected to a cure. It's not uncommon for love to be this theme or driving force in fantasy books that pushes characters to break through in their power or dig deep to accomplish things. So I'm going to keep that in my brain as we keep reading.
Chef's kiss on that analysis. I think you're absolutely right. By Xaden's own admission, the lure of power is inescapable and it is really strong. And we know that Xaden is infamous for his control. But I really believe without his love for Violet, he would have never made it this far without fully turning Venom. But the power of love is stronger than the power of the power. Wow, that sounds weird. I should have reread that. Say power of power 5 times fast, but you guys get
power
of power. But you guys get what I mean.
I also find how the relationship and scenes together are written to feel, I know mates aren't a thing in this book, but it feels mate-ish in a way. They have this extremely deep bond that seems very intense. I think I mentioned this back in the very first episode, but the language that's used to describe the relationship really makes me feel there's something else going on. I don't think it's just the fact that they love each other or that they have a bond because their dragons are mated. It truly feels like there is a deeper magical, maybe gods or goddess related thing happening between the two of them. For example, they both frequently refer to the other as being mine, and it says things like drugging kiss in the scene. It all just kind of invokes this feeling of like moth to a flame energy where they both are addicted to each other in this very intense way.
Yeah, I think this sentiment is echoed kind of in the descriptive language from the last set of chapters about how when they collided, they made something new. For me, it's always the mine statements. In other fantasy books both Lauren and I have read, when there are fated mates, usually there's love, but there's this deeper underlying tone of we belong to each other because the fates have ordained it. And Violet and Xaden constantly say mine to each other. And I think that's why it feels very fated, matey, kind of in that way.
Yeah. Xaden says, I'm never giving you up. You had your chance to run. You should run by. Violet also tells Xaden, I'm never running. It's you and me, no matter what. Both of these statements are kind of ominous in their own ways. And it kind of plays into the turning for love situation, which has already happened for Xaden. But I'm almost waiting for the shoe to drop in Violet's case. Like either she makes some sort of bargain or sacrifice to save Xaden, or she ends up turning Venom as well. I'm not saying I like that possibility. I really hate it, and it makes me want to like throw up. But there's some implications that don't make me feel great.
No, dude, yes, that's totally accurate, especially with Theophanie's whole you'll come to me thing. I mean, you know, but Violet's response didn't seem as ominous to me, but for sure when Xaden said that, it felt bad. Honestly, it almost kind of ruined the spicy scene for me. I was like, can y'all save that for later? Xaden has said things like that before, especially in Fourth Wing when they first started dating. He was all like, I'm going to push you away. I'm big and bad and dangerous and you don't want this. But now that he's Venom, it feels different when he says that. It feels a little bad. It feels bad to read.
Yeah. But getting back into the idea that they have some sort of deeper, possibly magical bond connecting them, it also brings to mind what Norelle said in chapter 24. Her quote was, what you call the divine intervention of love, we call alchemy. Two substances combined to make something entirely new, not unlike what's between the two of you. I hadn't thought about this last episode, but the wording divine intervention of love seems quite suspicious to me. Is it possible there is some force from the gods that pushed Xaden and Violet together for a specific reason?
Ooh, that's really interesting. I'm going to go out on a speculative limb here, so just bear with me. I mean, that's really what we do all the time, so I don't know why I felt the need to preface that. But it's heavily implied and speculated that Lyra and Warwick for the first 6 riders were romantically involved. We don't know what their signets were, but what if one was a shadow wielder and one was a lightning wielder? And we know that those 2 signets manifesting concurrently has only happened twice in history. And I'm just saying that seems like a big coincidence to me, to just be a coincidence. And now you have Violet and Xaden, Shadow and Lightning, they're romantically involved. And I know you touched on this in the last episode, but it feels like there's this element of like history is repeating itself. These events are all coming together. It's just like this cycle of, I don't know what to say.
Yeah, history is repeating itself. And because they still haven't found the full cure or an actual way to defeat the Venom, it's just going to keep happening, it feels like, until they finally do.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I totally agree with that, though.
I know.
I don't like it. Yeah. Anyways, Remember when you said that Narelle referring to them as Amarales reminded you of Amari?
Yes, I do.
I mean, is Amari somehow the one who's intervening or blessing Violet and Xaden's love for each other? Violet herself has said that growing up, she'd always preferred Amari's temple until her father died. Plus, we get the excerpt from chapter 3, where Lilith writes, "Sometimes I worry about Violet. When she finally and truly gives that heart, I fear it will overrule the other gifts you've given her, and logic will cede its voice to love." It feels like love is both symbolically their downfall, but also their salvation in this story, in a way. I know that Loyal is the traditional goddess of love in this series, but perhaps Amari, as Queen of the Gods, is intervening as well.
Oh, okay.
Also, hold on to Amari, because I have another thought about her in relation to Andarna's Breed for later, so...
Ooh, okay.
Anyways, to move on from this love conversation, despite the nature of this whole scene, I actually got really teary-eyed during some of this because it becomes so evident how hard it has been on the relationship for Xaden to be Venin. Intimacy looks different for everyone in their romantic relationships, but for Violet and Xaden, physical intimacy is like a huge part of how they express their love for each other. This is a theme we discussed last episode for Xaden as well, but this scene continues to point out the competing interests between Xaden's individual desires and then his other responsibilities, which in this scene involves Sigale and what she is experiencing without magic as well. He has other commitments and other things that he has to do, even if all he wants to do is just like be with Violet, basically, you know? And then to keep going on this teary-eyed thing, I got some tears when Violet offers they could stay in Demerelli, if only to give Xaden some relief. And then Xaden responds, "Sigale is in pain. All the dragons are. Not that they'll admit it, but I don't think they can survive, or at least thrive the way they do at home, away from magic. I could never cause Sigale pain, and I could never let you abandon everyone you love." And that cut so deep. I don't have kids, but I do have dogs and a boyfriend, and I think everyone can relate to the idea of sacrificing for those you love, but the fact that he's willing to endure his own venom demons so that Sigale is okay and Violet doesn't have to be separated from her family and friends.
Oh. Lorraine works really hard so her dogs can have a nice life. So she gets it, you know, sort of like Xaden. He works really hard so Sigale can have a nice life. Yeah. So this also stood out to me, but actually not for emotional reasons, although I think you're absolutely right. This is really heartbreaking. When Xaden says, "I could never cause Sigale pain," it prompted two immediate thoughts for me. Asher's cryptic clue for the password to his research, "First love is irreplaceable." When Violet realizes it's Imsur, she even thinks about how Imsur's health and wellness was top priority and literally impacted the well-being of the Sorrengail family as she was growing up. In the same thought, it also reminded me of Halden's conversation with Violet when he first comes back and he's like, a dragon rider's first priority will always be their dragon. You know, once you realize that, you realize, another guy's no competition. And I think all of that tracks with what Xaden says, but then I realize he's already caused Sigale pain by choosing Violet and turning Venom to save her, which I think is especially poignant and powerful given everything we know about the deep connection that riders feel with their dragons. And so the fact that his love for Violet was so great that he was willing to cause Sigale pain and do that. Because remember back at the end of Iron Flame, when you get Xaden's POV, when he pulls, there's that scene that everyone likes to talk about where Sigale's like, I chose you. And he's like, I chose her. And you're just like, and so it really sort of draws into juxtaposition how much Xaden truly loves Violet, that he overrode the needs of his dragon, his first irreplaceable love. I know, right?
That's so true. What do you mean this wasn't like an emotional response?
You know what? You're right. I don't know why I didn't think it was emotional. I don't know. You're right, man. Now I want to cry. But overall, I thought it was interesting. And I think it also feeds a little into the idea that maybe Violet and Xaden are fated in some way. What could be stronger than a bond to your dragon? Fate.
Ooh,
I know.
That's deep. Yeah.
We're getting deep today.
Yeah. Okay. To get back on track, the pattern of the Empyrean series seems to be whenever Violet and Xaden get spicy time, the squad is always waiting on the other side with some sort of emergency. I feel like it's happened like almost every single time.
Every single time.
was obviously no exception, as they're interrupted by a knock on the door.
No, seriously, because in Fourth Wing, Garrick interrupts them, and Iron Flame, Brennan, and basically all of the Eurasian riders interrupt them. It's just, it's so funny, but also maddening. I was also cracking up when Xaden opened the door to Tell and was like, to what do we owe the honor of a visit from every single one of you?
The aftermath of the spicy scene was hilarious because then the broken table also does not go unnoticed. And I laughed out loud when Riddick said, "You two totally broke it, didn't you? Like that armoire, no one was supposed to notice getting hauled out of her room during first year."
Oh my God. I was literally laughing so hard I could not breathe. And then Mira with the what? Like in front of your big sister, like, oh, I would kill Riddick. Yeah. I would kill him.
But on a serious note, Dane announces that King Courtland has decided to keep Halden. And I was like, oh, there it is. The bad thing that we felt like was going to happen with him.
Surprise or fucking prize. And not Zeta with the casual shrug and like, too bad for fucking Halden.
I know. He like really didn't care at all. But I mean, fuck around and find out, Halden. So ultimately, Takaris needs Zayden since he is the only aristocrat. I almost said aristocat.
Everybody wants to be a cat. Did you ever watch that, The Aristocats?
Not very much. I think I watched it sporadically, but not
what? That was like a core of my childhood. Oh my God. If you liked Aristocats, send us a text.
So, anyways, not Aristocat. He is the only aristocrat King Courtland would let in. And with a plea from Violet, Xaden agrees, but Violet is going with him. Also, it's noted that 2 squad members would be flying the southern route to look for Irits. So they're still on the hunt. And that ends chapter 25, moving on to chapter 26. All right, the excerpt for this chapter. All that optimism I felt thinking that maybe Xaden can stay in the Isles as a temporary solution or intermittently to give him a break last episode. Yeah, that went straight out the window with this excerpt. And
right out the window.
Does not feel good.
No. Whatever little glimmer of hope I had extinguished. The moment I read that, I was like, well, fuck. This is not going to go well for a variety of reasons. Thanks a lot. She giveth and she taketh away real fast. Before we jump into the analysis of this, I want to point out that this is from a study in the anatomy of the enemy, and this is not the first time this book has been mentioned. Back in chapter 20 of Onyx Storm, Violet is describing how she's been doing all the things to prepare for her mission, and she says, by the time Friday arrives, I've devoured the dark side of magic, red regalia, the scourge of our times, and the nightmare-inducing a study in the anatomy of the enemy. And so I kind of thought it was interesting giving Violet scribe brain and how she can apply logic that she didn't remember that when they take Xaden out of the borders of magic and kind of was more wary of that.
Oh, I feel like it's going to come back up again. Any book that she is reading where the title gets mentioned, I'm logging that and holding on to it because there's going to be some moment later in the book where she's like, oh, I remember reading this book and it said XYZ and now, you know, this is why this happened. And I'm going to be like, oh my gosh. But as you said, the study discusses how an ASIM ranked venin they used in this study was fine without magic for the first 24 hours. However, after 24 hours, withdrawal symptoms progressed rapidly, revealing the subject's quote-unquote true nature. This resulted in the venin being moved to stage 2, which really just means killing off the venin. The results are listed under 2 categories. The first one being 33B, which was titled Death by Fire, and then also in 46C, which was titled Death by Poison. Whew. So this obviously has some major implications. First, removing a venin from a magic source does not prevent further veninness, and they can present normally for about 24 hours before the drive to seek magic overtakes them. However, I do think it's important to note that in this study, they were talking about an ASIM, but it's unclear if this applies to all venin at any stage or just an ASIM-ranked venin. Second, from how I am interpreting this study, it seems like they tried 2 different methods to kill the venin. The first method was fire, which didn't work, thus forcing them to try the second method, poison, which apparently did. Or I guess it doesn't say for sure.
That it
implied
did,
that
right?
it did. Yeah. So if they were using normal dragon fire, then I guess that checks out with the information we've already been given about regular dragon fire. And of course, we've also already discussed how we believe that Andarna's fire is different. I'm also very curious about what poison they're talking about and where they got said poison. As a follow-up, is this poison connected to the poison that Andarna produces on the barb of her scorpion tail that she used to kill Solus with?
Yeah, I feel like there's been a growing increase of mentions of different kinds of poisons, like the Phalaronia moth.
Yeah.
And we know poisons have been Violet's thing since Fourth Wing, so I feel like anything about a poison, I just do a little highlight and like, I'll circle back to that later. We've talked about this a few times already, so I don't want to rehash the whole discussion, but we really, really need to know how else we can kill venom besides Alloy and Violet's lightning. If we can starve them to death, if we can poison them, I don't know, anything really. Can we drown them? Any of that information would be super helpful. No, really, because we know it's difficult for them to produce enough alloy. I mean, we'll take any weapon we can get, okay? So we can drop a little poison bomb on one of their colonies and they all just... we'll take it, okay? We need to know.
Man, that's crazy.
This book has really hardened me, yeah.
As far as the chapter goes, Taryn, Violet, and Sigale and Xaden all fly out to King Cortland's palace, while Andarna was ordered to stay behind for now. Violet once again takes note of the crossbolts, which indicate the Isle wants to do them, quote, harm, and it possibly already is, but this also prompts her to ask if Taryn and Andarna are in pain. I loved Taryn's response when he says, "You live in pain. Do you feel as though you need to alert me every time your knee twinges or your joints slip?" I mean, realistically, this was one of the reasons why he chose Violet, knowing that she didn't let her physical differences stop her from doing anything. Violet is very strong and has always been able to work through her pain and push herself past what I think most normal people would probably struggle with because, she's used to being in pain all the time. So
yeah, her ability to compartmentalize is off the charts. The fact that she's developed coping strategies for her pain, like I put it in the mental box and I'm like, that girl, hella strong. It's rare that Taryn is actually sweet. And I love this moment between the two of them. I think it just shows how Violet and Taryn really are a perfect match for each other in that sense. He's like all curmudgeon-y and stuff. And I'm still not loving when he's like, ignore the dark one. But he really does respect Violet and what she goes through, and I just love them. I love that he always stands by Violet's decisions, even if he's like, I don't agree with you, but I'll still go. But I don't like it, but I'll still do it.
Right. I like that too. He lets Violet make her own decisions and her own actions, and he doesn't try to stop her out of worry for her. Like he believes or has confidence that she will be able to push through something and figure it out. He also goes on to assure her that Andarna shows no sign of trouble and that though he was inconvenienced and annoyed by being cut off from his power and Sigale, ultimately Taryn was fine because he is Tyrnanok, son of I don't know. I should have practiced.
You should have practiced.
Mertkudium? And
it's like something with the
clan fuel.
The clan
fuel. Oh, Mertkudium and Fia clan fuel.
We'll work on that for the next episode, guys. We'll get his lineage down. But honestly, I have really enjoyed in this book when Taryn starts one of his "don't you know who I am" rants, and Violet's just like, okay, I know, just keep it moving. She cuts him off every time.
She does, but also at the same time, I'm like, no, let him cook. Let him keep talking because I want to know. I want to know what else he's going to say.
You do? Oh, you think it's important, don't you?
Yes, I do. I feel like he's going to reveal something that we're going to need to remember or something. Anyways, the thing that stuck out to me is how Taryn states Andarna shows no sign of trouble. And we were wondering last episode about what was ultimately allowing Taryn, Violet, and Andarna to still communicate. Well, I am taking this as evidence that it's actually Andarna. Buckle up, guys. I have a theory.
Ooh, yeah.
So I started digging around, per usual, but actually, this investigation was prompted from our discussion last episode about how in Anka, the dragons had to relocate to ground that hadn't been drained in order to still have access to magic and allow the riders to also wield. Keep in mind, Indarna was not present for the Anka mission, right? She wasn't there and they were having to hop around and find magic and stuff. So, back in chapter 10 of Onyx Storm, Theophany had asked Violet, now tell me, which chose you first? The one who gifted you the power of the sky or the Irid? At the time, I thought she was referring to Terran and how Violet wields lightning, but what if this was actually a reference to the idea that you get power from the sky and not Violet wielding lightning? So then, remember how we said a couple episodes ago how it feels like a lot of information events from Fourth Wing in particular are coming back up in Onyx Storm as well? Well, one such chapter was Chapter 31 of Fourth Wing. There's a whole paragraph on the various stories about the fables and everything, but in particular, Violet notes another talks about the dangers of wielding power from the ground instead of the skies, as one could easily start drawing from the earth and eventually be driven mad.
I mean, it's out there. It's been said.
I also have more. In Chapter 37 of Fourth Wing, the excerpt literally said, but it was the third brother who commanded the sky to surrender its greatest power, who finally vanquished his jealous sibling at a great and terrible price. And then within that same chapter, the venom that stabs Violet with the poison-tipped dagger literally tells her, such untapped power, no wonder we were called here. You could command the sky to surrender all its power. And I bet you don't know what to do with it, do you?
Oh, you're right. They do say command the skies a lot.
Command the sky.
Command the sky. What does that mean?
It's said way too often, right? And
Yeah.
when you look at all of these pieces together, then you're like, oh, shit. Last but not least, or at least that's what I did. Literally last episode, we discussed how when they fly to Anka outside the wards, Violet feels the urge to pluck strands of magic from the sky. And so what if this was actually a reflection of her feeling more drawn to a different source of power, aka the sky's power or magic? I do still think it's also a reflection of Violet's increasing skill with her own power and magic, but the language of it feels very similar to everything else that I've listed out so far. All of this to say, is it possible that Indarna and the Irids actually access magic from the sky and not the ground, and that's what makes them so special and unique? If this is true, then it also makes sense why Violet is still able to talk to Indarna and Terran. Terran himself notes that he feels the pain and also can't access his power, but obviously Indarna was fine, or seems to be fine. It also would explain the conduit situation later, because that was like a big moment where we're like, whoa, what's going on?
Mm-hmm.
So
yes.
If we're working with this theory, then it also opens up a whole different can of worms about the nature of the other dragons and what it means about them if the other 6 breeds channel from the earth and not the sky. There's just too many questions that come out of all this, but...
No, I really like... Well, let me back up. First of all, you deserve a standing ovation for that, okay? This all really tracks for me. And especially as you were saying it all, I'm thinking about when they first go out of the boundaries of magic and Terran has like a noticeable visceral reaction. And I feel like Indarna is mysteriously absent in that conversation, right? She's not like, I feel it, it feels bad. You know, she's just quiet. We know that she's kept secrets from Terran and Violet, obviously. Before, she didn't tell Terran that she was an Irid or that she was special in any way. And so it wouldn't be out of the realm of possibilities for Indarna to keep things to herself, to be honest.
She doesn't even tell Violet at the end of Iron Flame when she figures out that Indarna is her own dragon breed. Then Indarna was like, if you couldn't figure it out, then you weren't worthy or something like that. Right?
Yeah.
And so she expects Violet to figure it out, and she believes that she can figure it out. And that's why she chose Violet specifically. So...
Which low-key is like a little annoying as you're saying.
I know.
I'm like, given everything that we're doing to help you, Indarna, you could disclose any information. That'd be great. But okay, I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole right now. But the piece of evidence I think most supports this for me is that there seems to be a developing correlation between magic acting oddly when Indarna is around. Specifically, like you pointed out, when Violet is flying and she feels that she can pluck strands of magic out of the sky. I thought it might have been an indication of it for a second signet, but now I'm like, what if that's an indication of Indarna's power and her presence near Violet. And we'll talk about this more as we go through the episode and probably in the next several episodes. This is all really starting to really solidify for me.
Yeah, it's weird. I'm telling you, things are weird. Something's going on. Okay. But anyways, I have a couple more thoughts in relation to this situation. Getting back to the Amari point as the Queen of the Gods, I actually wonder if Amari may be connected with Andarna's breed, and there's a reason Narelle referred to them as Amaralis. I searched for references to Amari in the ebook, and there was one line that stuck out to me. It was in chapter 5 when the Navarian riders get into a tiff with the Eurasian riders and flyers, and Violet steps in and thinks, I may have some mixed feelings about Dane, but there's no way under Amari's sky that I'm gonna let Aura harm any Eurasian rider. If we go with the theory that Andarna and the Irids channel from the sky, then is Amari the goddess that blesses them or like gifts them with that power? And then are the people that live on the continent referred to as Amaralis by Narelle because Amari is the main goddess of the continent or has, I don't know, like blessed the continent or whatever it is. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
So it could also be that Andarna and the Irids themselves are like blessed by the gods differently or like have a different relationship. I don't know. Okay, I know nothing, but my brain was reeling.
We know nothing. We are nothing. We're just along for the ride, guys. Okay.
Yeah.
No, but I mean, really, I feel like there's a point where there are too many connections just to be coincidence. There's no way, right?
Yeah.
We may be missing the mark on what the connection is, but I think we're on to at least the idea that there is a connection that's relevant.
Yeah.
I really do think we're going to get some more pieces to the puzzle as we visit each Isle Kingdom. And again, this tracks for me because as we've discussed, the gods are starting to play a huge role in this book. And I feel like that their presence is going to continue to grow as we move forward.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. So once they get to King Courtland's palace area or close to it, I also thought it was interesting that Violet notes the incredible engineering of King Courtland's palace and that it was made 1,000 years ago and hadn't faded into ruin like so many of the ancient castles of kingdoms past on the continent. Notably, it's also been carved into the hillside. I just note this as historical information because Deverelli's history is much longer than that of Navarre's, or at least that we know of, and it once again makes you wonder what they've experienced and what they know. I guess as far as a unified Navarre goes, we know that was like 600 years ago, and then we don't really know anything beyond that for like 630-ish years ago, I guess. But Deverelli being around for 1,000 years just historically feels notable. So Tyrion and Sigale land in the meadow in front of the palace, and Violet takes note of a couple things as a group of Deverelli guards head toward them. First, she notes Xaden brought an oversized pack that he told her was for just in case, and we will learn shortly what he's gotten there. Second, there are dozens of orbs lighting the path with a blue glow. Violet notes the insects inside the orbs providing the glow are called Falerinia moths, which light up when they feed on honeycomb. Falerinia moths don't exist on the main continent, but they have a sister species that does, and Violet thinks poisonous, but brilliant. Just in general, I did think that this was super cool, and they kind of remind me of like fireflies in a way.
Yeah.
Kind of like the dolphin and the dolphinum.
Yeah.
But I was wondering if this is going to be relevant for something later on. As we've already pointed out and discussed earlier, poison keeps being brought up in different forms. And so poisonous Falerinia moths, what's going on there?
I absolutely do not think this detail was in there just for some interesting detail. Poison is one of Violet's things. I think it's possible that Violet will use the poison from these moths to get out of a situation, maybe on one of the isles, like if it goes badly and they get captured, or I don't know. But the poison is going to be harnessed. Maybe that's the poison that they use to kill Venom from the excerpt.
Yeah.
But don't sleep on those Falerinia moths, okay?
The Deverelli guards come out and they have weapons. In this case, they're serrated blades, which is counter to Deverelli being a weaponless society. I thought it was kind of hilarious that the guard Violet calls Flare Nose tries to charge them with a blade, but Taryn steps out and just like roars at her. And then she ends up shaking like a leaf, and then she just sits on the ground. She's like, all right, I'm done.
I'm done.
I commend them for trying to stand up to the dragons because that could never be me. I'm a turn around and walk away type of person. I'm not gonna.
Oh, could never
need to get
be
close. If they're like 100 yards away, bye.
Yeah.
Leave.
Could never be me. To use Violet's words, I would absolutely be shitting myself. I also thought it was hilarious when Violet was like, no, they don't like it when you do that. And I'm like, I would not be fucking with no dragon, okay? No dragon, no rider. I'd be like, whatever you want. Please come right in. May I get you an hors d'oeuvre?
Ultimately, Xaden pulls out his title as Duke of Tyrador and names Violet as his consort to get them access into the palace. Violet is shocked by this, but I love that Taryn chimes in with, are congratulations or commiserations in order? He's like, are we celebrating or crying over this?
So rude.
How are we feeling? But as we could not stop pointing out last episode, again, this adds to some potential foreshadowing for the likelihood that Violet and Xaden may get married. So... With Duke Zaddy Ryerson in the house, the tone with the guards changes immediately, and they attempt to get them to part with the weapons, stating, we do not believe in weaponry, which is hilariously hypocritical, as Violet points out. But ultimately, they are allowed to keep them. They head into the palace, which is mostly outdoors, and they pass an open-air receiving room, and Xaden notes, no walls, no ceilings. In general, I find the construction of this palace to be really odd. They clearly fear the dragons in Deverelli, and yet many parts of the palace seem spacious enough to accommodate them.
Yeah, well, not only that, it's all open air, which gives fire-breathing dragons full access to cook everything within the palace.
Right.
So I do think part of the reason it's set up like that, though, is because of the oppressive heat. Remember when they first get to Deverelli, right. Violet notes multiple times how excruciatingly miserable and hot and humid is there. So that's probably why. But it is interesting because they have the crossbolts, so clearly they're afraid of wyvern dragons, you know, anything that breathes fire, but yet their palace is like basically a charcuterie board for dragons to get to.
Yeah, I don't know. Something's kind of off to me about the whole situation. But as they're walking, Violet also brings up the consort thing again. And I loved Xaden's response to her when she says, we aren't married. And then he responds, I've noticed, but girlfriend is missing that permanent tone. I was like, oh, thanks. But for now, Violet decides to delay further discussion until a time when they aren't risking death.
So never. They're never going to have that conversation.
They're never going to talk about it. They make it to the dining hall, which is also within an open-air chamber, where they find King Courtland sitting at a U-shaped table atop a dais, twirling a bejeweled dagger. And then Halden sits on the right end of the table. First of all, gem watch on that dagger. Second, Violet is surprised at how young and handsome King Courtland is, noting that he only seems to be a few years older than Xaden.
Man, I told you that everyone in this series is hot. I told you that. Literally everyone. People, dragons, panthers, they're all good looking.
Yep, for real. I was not expecting that either.
I really thought it was going to be some like 60-year-old man. I don't know why I thought that. But when she's like, he's young, I was like, oh, all right.
Oh, it's now. You don't say.
Does he have a queen?
As they approach, Xaden asks Violet to stay close, and Violet quickly gives him some facts about Deverelli. She tells him they don't mince or waste words. They speak in double meanings only when it's convenient to them. They value status, wealth, knowledge, and secrets, anything that can be traded. If you break your word once, you're never trusted again. Which basically all sounds like Deverelli is always in favor of whatever suits Deverelli. And they're
pretty much
the words.
Yeah.
Now, okay, this is where things get really interesting. Violet immediately asks Holland what he did to get himself nabbed, which I thought was funny. She's like default assuming that it was his fault.
Clearly.
Holden states he'd reestablished diplomatic connections with Deverelli and asked to use Tukaris' banner to launch a search mission with the dragons from. But when the Emelian citrine was not enough as payment, he'd offered, to rumroll please, the Blade of Erasia. Before the info about the blade is revealed, Courtland literally stabs Halden in the hand with the blade, which had me gawking at the page in stunned shock.
Oh yeah, this is the moment where I was like, oh shit, it's about to get really real. When they first tell them the king is keeping Halden, you're kind of like, oh shit, yeah, this is going to be a problem. They'll just work it out. But then Courtland stabs him and you're like, oh my God, I see where this is going and it's going to end badly for a lot of people.
Yeah. So Violet takes note that this dagger looks to be antique with a silver handle and emeralds the size of her fingernails adorning the hilt. Emeralds! Gem list.
Gem Watch, baby. That's right. You know, we're on Gem Watch on this podcast.
So when Halden tried to offer the Blade of Oresha, this was a huge problem in the eyes of King Cortland because now that Xaden was restored his title as Duke of Tyrrendor, the Blade of Oresha belongs to him. So when Halden attempted to use it for negotiations on behalf of Navarre, he was negotiating in bad faith under false pretenses. As Violet pointed out, if you break your word once, you are never trusted again in Deverelli. As a historical note, the Blade of Oresha was taken for the royal vault of Navarre by King Reginald during unification. I believe King Reginald was the first Navarrian king, right?
That's my understanding, yeah, because after unification, they had to elect a singular king. Because I actually searched him through the ebooks just to make sure. And that's my understanding.
Yeah. Okay. In relation to this revelation, this also means Cortland has been getting information about Navarre's political climate, which begs the question, how is he getting this information? Did Takaris tell him about Xaden's restored title?
Yeah, that is an excellent, excellent point. My assumption would be that Takaris is keeping him informed. We know Takaris likes to trade with Deverelli, and information is something that the people of Deverelli will trade in. So that's what seems most likely to me.
So the situation with the Blade of Oresha turns out to be one of two mistakes that Halden has made. But Cortland threatens everyone by calling in his little ones, aka 3 giant white panthers, coming in for a meal. I did find it interesting that Taryn growls and Violet takes note of Andarna's golden energy intensifying along the bond. I feel like it's been a while since her bond has been described as gold, but also her increased energy in the bond feels important to note. Cortland introduces the Panthers as Shira, Sheena, and Shora, who are all adept at sniffing out a thief. And then he looks at Halden. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Violet warns Halden to remove the dagger and bandage his hand immediately, while Cortland warns against anyone helping him do so, stating, I need to know you can uphold your end of a bargain even when it's unpleasant to do so, just as your father did. And he's looking at Xaden as he said this. I was like, whoa, whoa, whoa. So that little line directly conflicts with what Violet noted in chapter 25 about Tyrrendor keeping contact up until the last century. And this feels like confirmation that Xaden's father had made deals with Deverelli.
I would agree with that. And I think it's also important to note, it seems like Xaden had no idea, which is kind of surprising because Xaden really seems to know a lot about Oratian history. I mean, just in general, he seems very well informed. And so I am very curious to see if there's going to be more revealed about what Fen was doing with Deverelli and what they were negotiating for.
Right. Halden ultimately obliges and takes the dagger out of his hand, and then Cortland turns to Xaden, who opens up new negotiations. Xaden asks for the following. He wants to reopen diplomatic channels, get permission to use Takaris' manor as a stopping point for a riot of up to 8 dragons and an equal number of griffins as part of a search party. He also then needs to get permission for the dragons and griffins to hunt. And last but not least, he wants a promise of safety for all parties involved. Before agreeing, Cortland asks for one honest answer to the question, to whom do you swear your fealty? And per usual, I loved Xaden's answer when he says, my loyalty is to Violet first above everything, everyone else, then Tyrrendor, then Navarre, in the moments it's worthy.
Oh my gosh, the hold that this man has on me. There's no words. I love him so much. After Cortland asks Xaden this, Violet reaches for her conduit out of habit, and it's described, I swear I can feel a hum, a swift rise in heat that I know is only in my head, but it's soothing all the same. This feels like another piece of evidence to support our conversation earlier about Andarna. It is important to note at this point Andarna is close, even though she wasn't supposed to be. Remember, on the way to the palace, Violet and Taryn tell Andarna to stay back, but as usual, she does not listen. It also reminded me of back in Iron Flame during the Battle of Besgaiath when she tells Andarna to hide, and Andarna repeats, I will be where I'm needed. And it feels like this theme is holding true. And I don't think it's a coincidence that Andarna keeps showing up in these situations that get a little sticky, you know? I mean, of course, they're bonded writers. So she can sense when Violet's in pain. She can hear what's going on between her and Taryn. But I think it's super notable that Andarna shows up. She feels this swift hum of rise of power. And you're like, It's not in your head, Violet. It's not in your head, which we'll talk about when we get a little bit further down. But
yes. No, I totally agree. And actually, it's funny that you brought up Andarna just showing up at really opportune times, because it almost makes me wonder if Andarna's entire presence involved some like foresight on her part. Is this like a precognition thing with Andarna? Is this a general power that her and her kind of being able to
sense things or just
sense the future and just know that she was supposed to be there for something? I don't know, but something's weird. Zeta brings up reopening of trade with this deal and the possibility of Deborelli becoming an ally for the war against the Venin. Cortland's response was also notable to me, and he says they've never involved ourselves with Venin because war destroys the Isles and blocks economies, but they do supply those at war because that is lucrative. Remaining neutral is Deborelli's advantage, no matter what god you worship or magic you can access. So, God watch, of course. We know that in Navarre, gods and goddesses are worshipped, but I wonder if there are other isles that either favor and worship certain gods and goddesses as well, or that just don't believe in them like Deborelli. But also, Cortland's response indicates that he is aware of Venin, but something about his wording involved ourselves with Venin, like we have never done that, is sort of weird. I can't quite put my finger on it, but...
Oh, I agree. It is a weird response. He really just shirks the question and does a lot of blustering, like, oh, don't you know who you are, or Deborelli, blah, blah, blah. And I think it's notable he doesn't confirm or deny whether they've been attacked or they've ever been present on the Isle.
This whole conversation was just riddled with suspicious things. Violet asks, but they've been here, right? Did you defeat them or cure them? And Cortland says to imply that our isle is weak, conquerable is a line you do not want to cross. People do not invest in unstable isles. I do get the sense that he's being intentionally unclear. But I feel like based on his answer, it's more likely that they defeated them, if at all, rather than cured them.
They definitely didn't cure them. They would sell that information to the highest bidder. I think it's most likely that they made a deal with the Venin to not mess with them. Based on his whole economies, trade, information, success, lucrative, blah, 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 it would seem most likely to me that the Venin, well, I mean, it's hard to say why would they be there, there's no magic, but in whatever interaction, it seems much more likely that Deborelli would strike a deal with Venin to leave them alone.
True. What follows after all this had me literally just gawking, but the Panther's meal is revealed, which includes a huge slab of meat and the Captain Anna Windshire's head.
Oh my God. As Violet said, the audacity. I did not see that coming at all. Like literally when that was revealed, I was like, oh my God. I was like, that's messed up, yo. That is too far.
It really is. But then again, Cortland reveals she was found in his treasury with 6 stolen treasures on her person and a list of 5 more she had yet to attain. And this note was written in Halden's handwriting.
He's so stupid. If you're going to do this, don't put it in your own handwriting. Good Lord.
I truly can't believe the idiocy of Halden at this point. Like, why did you think that you were going to get away with that?
Not only that, but he was righteously indignant. Like, he really thought he was in the right. He's like, you stole from us. And we're like, dude, come on.
We learned shortly that the treasures he was trying to get back are priceless magical artifacts. I don't know about you, but my brain immediately asked the question, did these magical objects belong to the first 6 riders and the first drift of flyers? Are they magical gems that belonged to them in the past? I really keyed in on the 6 stolen and then a list of 5 more, because we've already noted that 6 seems to be this repeated number. 6 gods that we know of, 6 main scenario members, 6 provinces in Navarre, 6 original riders, 6 main dragon breeds, and then, Andarna is the special 7th breed. I don't think it's a coincidence. But of course, this then leads you to ask, what is the king of a place that supposedly has no magic doing with all these magical artifacts? Is it purely for trading purposes, or is he planning on somehow finding a way to use these objects himself?
Honestly, I think Deborelli just likes to collect things for the sake of having them. That's the vibe it gives. And I think they like that because it provides them with great leverage and bargaining power if they ever want to strike a deal. If they ever want something from Navarre, they'll be like, hey, we have X, Y, and Z. And so Honestly, I think it's really just for collection.
Okay, yeah.
I'm sure yet another thing I said
Fair
that
enough.
won't age well by the next set of chapters.
I mean, I don't know either, but if you guys haven't noticed, I ask a lot of questions, so.
Yeah, I'm always wrong, so I'm just like, you know what? Who knows? I was right about Halden and that's it, and since then, ain't got one more thing right.
No, I feel like you've been onto some stuff.
Oh, thank you. I can't think of anything in this moment, but
Sawyer's leg?
oh, yeah, oh, wow. Sawyer's leg and Halden. Don't get me wrong, important piece of the story, but I mean, if we're going for, like, big picture things, it's not really what we're going
No,
for.
I like your analysis on stuff.
I know.
You know I'm out here spewing nonsense all the time, and who knows when I'm right or wrong, so.
I have many an audio message from you.
Okay. Another historical twist is revealed when Cortland argues those items are mine, received as goods bartered for services rendered over the last century. Hold up. Just like Violet, I too did a double take at this because it also means Navarre has remained in contact with Deborelli as of pretty recently. Violet also recalls in this conversation, she's thinking about what Auric had said to her back in Iron Flame. The direct conversation she, I believe, is referring to is from chapter 33 when they break into the royal vault. Auric states that it's Halden's destiny to be king, and when Violet asks if he knows about the venom, he says yes, but implies Halden wasn't planning on doing anything about it. In relation to all of this, at the end of chapter 21 in Iron Flame, when Violet takes Auric to the infirmary after a challenge, she realizes that he knows about the venom. In particular, Auric notes the alloy daggers he'd noticed his guards carrying that had tipped him off about the venom's existence. As a side note related to these notes from Iron Flame, when they go to the royal vaults to get work in Lyra's journal, I cannot get the line out of my head where Imogen says, "You know no writer has ever been king, right?" And then Violet says, "That's not entirely true," and then gets cut off.
Ooh.
I don't know how that's connected to everything, but it definitely feels important just to kind of remember from that conversation.
Feels like Halden's going to get got in this book and Auric's going to be the new king of Navarre is what it feels like to me.
I know, but also implying that there has been a writer who's been king before. That's pretty significant.
Yeah, I think there's obviously some kind of technicality or qualifier there, but no, absolutely.
Right. So anyways, I give this background from Iron Flame because it connects back to this conversation. But to get back on track, Violet also realizes that Halden hadn't just known about the venom. He'd been playing a starring role. And then Halden says to Cortland, "You took advantage of our desperation, accepted priceless magical artifacts under unfair terms." Not only does this indicate Deborelli was helping Navarre in some way, but when you think about those Iron Flame references, is it possible that Deborelli helped Navarre secure alloy weapons that Navarre needs to boost the wards, but also to kill venom with?
Of course, we don't get any real hints about what Navarre could possibly want from Deborelli, but doing some logic building and process of elimination, the only thing Navarre really needs is weapons to fight off the venom and keep their borders secure. Deborelli doesn't have magic, so they can't provide them with anything like that. So I think it stands to reason that they are providing them with weapons and or materials. We know a little bit about how alloy is created, and we know certain elements, but we don't know where they're sourced. And so it's possible that they're brokering that kind of deal with Deborelli to help mine or gather those materials and ship them to them. So I think that stands to reason.
Right. Okay, I'm glad you're tracking with me on that because I thought I was getting a little crazy with that thought. But
no.
Okay, that makes me feel better.
No, I mean, because Halden knows about these deals that have gone down where Navarre has given them priceless magical artifacts in exchange. So it's like, what could they possibly need from Deborelli? Why would they be brokering a deal with them? And really, weapons is the only thing that tracks.
Yes. Agreed.
Yes. Twin.
Where have you been? Yes. Halden once again lets his anger get the best of him when he yells, "We want no part of you, your deception, or this God's forsaken isle." And then he flips the table over, which of course really makes Cortland mad. I do want to call attention to him calling Deborelli God's forsaken. I don't know what it means. But since we're on God Watch, it's notable when he specifically calls a place forsaken by the gods. Anyways, Xaden quickly steps in and asks for negotiations to be made on behalf of Tyrandor instead, promising that only Aratian riders and flyers would come to Deborelli and would abide by their customs and laws. He then begins to pull out another item from his oversized bag that has an emerald-studded hilt that looks very familiar to the Blade of Aratia, but Violet stops him and offers her secret item instead. We are about to learn what these items are, so I'll save those thoughts for later. But once again, Halden opens his mouth at the worst possible time to protest, decides he's had enough, and orders his guards to kill them all.
Fucking Halden. Fucking Halden. Man, can I just say the excitement really picked up in this set of chapters? Honestly, I was thinking about just the episodes we've done, and I'm like, I haven't felt the real spark of excitement since 7 through 12 when we found out about Garrick and Theophany and everything. And this set of chapters, I was like, oh my God, okay, it's back.
So exciting. Anyways, that ends chapter 26. Moving on to chapter 27, starting with the excerpt. This was very straightforward. It is the line from Lilith Sorrensgale's journal, and it simply says, "Diplomacy is best served at sword point." I think this excerpt speaks straight to the events of chapter 27 when Violet and Xaden are forced to retaliate against Cortland and defend themselves. It also makes me wonder how often Lilith has had to do this herself, as in using force to push diplomatic or political relations and agendas. It seems like Papa S has traveled around and studied different areas, so I wonder if Lilith has as well.
All I have to say about this excerpt is, for once, we get one that is short, sweet, and to the point of the chapter and lines up with it. And thank Amari, because, man, sometimes it's nice when it just lines up and you're like, okay, I got it.
So in the chapter, "We Are Not Dying Tonight" is the theme, as Violet and Xaden arm themselves with swords and daggers. They do, however, need to tread carefully international relations and all, which Violet passes on to the dragons as well. Of course, Taryn in his usual manner responds, "I resent the implication that I'm given to melodramatics."
Which I think Taryn is quite possibly the most melodramatic character in the entire series. So that just,
yes.
Oh my God, really, Taryn? But I also noted this line because it hits so differently on a reread, because I think it really shows the difference between Xaden and Vaden. Normal Xaden is like, don't kill anyone, it's bad for our goals. But once Vaden takes over, he literally kills everyone. And so I think that really shows the differences between when Xaden's in control and when Vaden is in control.
So pretty much an epic fight scene ensues. People are getting kicked off stairs, getting stabbed in the hand, sliced behind the knees, until the moment Violet gets yeeted by her braid. It's not funny, but
like a little bit, a little bit. But I have to point out, she actually thinks about this earlier, because she's annoyed she didn't have time to put it up like she normally does. And it also makes me call way back to Fourth Wing when Lilith, Mira, and even Dane have different conversations with her where they're like, there's a reason women keep their hair short, because someone can get a hold of it during a fight. And Violet is learning a very valuable lesson in this moment.
Yeah. Learned the hard way in this, this instance. So the guard who eats her bread asks, "Do your dragons scream before they die, Firebringer? Does it take them minutes to perish after you do, or is it instant?" This comment, along with when Cortland yells out, "It's the only way to kill their mouths," indicates that in Deverelli, I think they believe killing the rider will kill the dragons, which for regular riders and dragons is not correct, but it is the case for Venom and Wyvern.
Ooh, that's a really good point. It seems like they're just conflating the two and don't realize that there's actually a difference, which also explains why they call them Firebringers, not dragons or wyverns, because they don't really know the difference.
Ooh, yeah. Despite their best efforts, there are too many guards swarming in, and this is when things really take a turn and ramp up. Violet notes an icy rage take over in Xaden's eyes, and she thinks whatever's swirling in those onyx eyes is a tempest I've never beheld. It's one step past fury, as though Dune herself has stepped into his eyes and now peers back at me. This is a really interesting way to describe someone, and to be honest, this is going to sound kind of whack, but with all our speculations about the gods coming into play in a bigger way, there's this little whisper in my ear that's like, is Xaden literally blessed by the gods, or does he somehow have a stronger connection to them? In this case, maybe Dune, because she's the one that's referenced. There have actually been a couple comments by Violet connecting Xaden to a god or Dune. So in Fourth Wing chapter 32, they're having spicy time before war games, and Violet says, "Oh gods." Xaden asks, "Which one are you calling out for?" And she says, "You." And then Xaden responds, "I appreciate the elevation to deity, but my name will do." In another example, also in Fourth Wing chapter 32, Violet thinks, The craving for him ignites again. How could it not when it looks like the gods blessed him and feels like the gods blessed me?
Ooh.
And then in Iron Flame, chapter 35, after they break Violet out from being tortured by Varish, she looks at Xaden and notes, I look up into the wrath of Dune in the form of gold flecks onyx eyes.
Oh.
That is like way too many mentions for it to not mean something about him.
Oh.
I don't know.
Yeah, that is way more than I thought. And I feel like this is starting to apply for our rule of once as an introduction, twice as a coincidence, and 3 times as an intention. Starting to flirt with that now because that's a lot more than I realized. So good find on that.
Also, just to point out, I don't remember if this was specifically said by Rebecca Yarros, but I believe Norse Irish-related mythology is kind of what inspired or
I think it's influenced her writing. Yeah, I think it's influenced.
Right. So Tyrandor is not connected to Norse mythology like as the full word, but Tyr, Tyr, is, and he is actually the god of war, which of course is crazy.
Ooh.
Because Dune is the goddess of war in this series. So why does Violet say it looks like Dune has stepped into his eyes?
I'm not going to lie. I like where your head's at. Honestly, I read this as the Venin and Xaden taking over, but I like your analysis better.
I mean, that's exactly what's happening, but I don't know. Too many god references for it to be coincidental. So Xaden pulls Violet to him, presses a kiss to her forehead, and just when you think this is like a last goodbye type of thing, nope. Instead, all the guards fall to the ground screaming, their heads twisted at unnatural angles, wisps of barely there shadows dissipate, and the band around Violet's waist falls away with a familiar caress. This shocks everyone. Taryn bristles on the bond, Andarna shudders, Cortland stammers, and Violet picks up the pebble-sized piece of alloy from her conduit, which has a complete and total lack of energy.
Oh my god, no!
So immediately we know that Xaden had channeled from the alloy to kill off the guards to protect Violet, but this is super important because A, it did in fact have power imbued in it, which leads you to then believe, B, Violet must have imbued it with her power. This also leads back to the earlier point about Andarna and the idea that if her magic comes from the sky instead of the ground, then the magic Violet can access through Andarna can still work in places that don't have magic, like Deverelli. I mean, it has to be Andarna because very shortly we see her also like shifting her appearance. She's like blending into the background and stuff like that, which is a magical thing in a place where all other dragons are cut off from their magic and like do not have their powers and stuff. So
I do agree with you, and I'll get to that in a second, but I do have to play devil's advocate in this moment and just say, it is possible that Violet had imbued the conduit with power before they left the continent.
True.
And the power stayed there.
True.
So just for the sake of argument, it is hypothetically possible that's why the power was there. Now, do I actually think that? No, absolutely. I think the moment where she feels that hum of power and she thinks it's just in her head is when she actually imbued it with power. I would like to add, as an additional piece of evidence to this theory, is that after Xaden kills the guards, it's described wisps of barely there shadows dissipate. Violet would have imbued very little power into the conduit, which means there really wouldn't have been that much for Xaden to take. I think the description of the shadows being wisps that are barely there are indicative of the strength of the shadows he could muster based on the power drained from Violet's conduit. So all of that aligns with this idea of Violet didn't think she was actually imbuing it. It was a sort of an incidental, accidental, emotional response, plus her proximity to Andarna. There's not that much power, but whatever he has is enough to draw these light shadows, I'll say. I know.
Yoink.
Yeah, totally. Honestly, if we're not right about this, I'll actually be a little, I don't know. I would be surprised. I'm a riot. Okay. No, we won't start a riot. We'll start a revolution.
Yeah. That distinction is important. So while I do not fault Xaden for channeling to protect Violet's life, obviously this is also bad because it gets him one step closer to becoming more Venin. But there is no time to waste, so Violet quickly takes over. She asks for Taryn and Dorna's help and then reopens negotiations with the stunned King Cortland. I will say that Violet's ploy with Dorna and threatening Shira, the Panther, to get Cortland to negotiate is strongly evoking a certain fire-breathing bitch queen we know and love. If you know, you know. But I also couldn't help but laugh when Andarna is standing with her wings tucked in and she's holding Shira delicately between her front 4 teeth, and Andarna even has her lips puckered so the little cat doesn't get drenched in dragon saliva. It's so cute.
It is so cute.
It's not, I guess it's not supposed to be cute, but I'm just imagining her like, look at me, I'm doing a good job. I'm being like very careful.
Give me a treat.
Yeah.
I also liked when Violet tells Cortland, see, that's my little one. And I'm like, yeah. She just happens to be a giant dragon. Also in this moment, the audacity of fucking Halden when he said, way to fuck up the negotiations, Ryerson. Like, what? Boy, I can't even form the words. Because, are you kidding me, Halden? Oh, God.
I just wanted to give him a little smack upside the head, you know?
Yes.
Just like a little, what are you thinking?
Seriously.
So once Cortland agrees to letting Xaden leave without attacking him and to renegotiating, Violet quickly sends him off with his fighting weapons, the Blade of Erasia and the Sword of Tyrandor, to, quote, handle whatever business he might have to do in Erasia, and then she begins renegotiating. Violet's terms are the same ones that Xaden stated, but she adds that Xaden be pardoned of any crime he committed that evening and that he be allowed to return to Devreli as a member of the Riot at any time. As payment, she offers the citrine, as originally promised, and also Andarna's eggshell.
Oh my God. I have so many thoughts about this. Okay, you go first because I'm heated about this.
So the description of her eggshell is extremely interesting to me. It says the shades of color graduate from the darkest onyx on the bottom to the brightest silvers on top, each ring of hardened scales nestled within the next, yet never separate. Onyx obviously matches Xaden's bond, and silver matches Violet's. I don't think that's a coincidence. I have no idea why this is, but it seems like Andarna's shell is like somehow this blend of Xaden and Violet's essence or something together, you know? Did Andarna somehow also know that Violet and Xaden would be the keys to solving the Venom problem? Or does she know something about whatever connection or love exists between Xaden and Violet? Kind of like how she knew that Violet would be the rider she needed to hatch for. This also finally answers the question about what the most valuable object Violet had in her possession and what Andarna meant when she was like, I know what to bring.
I have 2 thoughts about the eggshell. The first is, when Violet puts the eggshell on the table, it's described, a charge of energy runs up my arm and I lift my brows at the sensation. Hello,
Ooh.
A charge of energy? Are you kidding me? I think this aligns with our theory that iridescents are magic and or power themselves, or they draw from the sky. Unclear about the source, but regardless, there's something unique about how they possess magic.
Yes.
And there's extra special power of magic in the shell, and that's why Violet feels that pulse of energy. Second, I cannot believe they gave up Andarna's eggshell. That is way too valuable to give up. It is quite literally one of a kind. I mean, if there are other irids, maybe, but even if there are other irids, they're not going to get their eggshells. They haven't had time to study it. We know that alloy is made with dragon eggshells. I feel like one of the first things they should do is crush up some of Andarna's shell and smelt it with some alloy to see if it does anything extra special. Like maybe it doesn't lose power like the other alloy daggers do. We've talked about that before, how they kind of lose their charge. Maybe it can be amplified. I don't know. But you're going to give it away? That's crazy to me.
That's actually a really good point. I didn't even think about, like, did you guys study this or do anything with this eggshell? Because if she's this rare 7th dragon breed, wouldn't you want to know?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, there's got to be other uses for dragon shell. Obviously, Violet and them don't know that Andarna may possess this special magical property, but like that eggshell itself could have magical properties. Hell, maybe it's part of the cure for Xaden. I don't know. The point is, nobody knows, and that's why they should not be giving it away. It drives me crazy. I haven't been this heated since they altered the wards in Basgaia.
No, that's a great point, though. Because, yeah, what is Cortland going to do with this? And do you really want him to be the one to find out anything unique or special about this dragon eggshell? I don't know. You're right.
Crazy.
I also found it interesting that at first Cortland doesn't really care, but when he learns it's a shell of an Irid dragon, the 7th dragon breed, his tune immediately changes. And that to me feels like he has to have at least heard of Irid dragons, right?
I don't think so. He doesn't realize it's a special shell. He just is like, once he's seen a dragon shell, whatever. Because he's not interested until he finds out she's an Irid. So I don't think he's ever heard of Irids.
True. I don't know. I feel like it wouldn't be out of the realm of possibilities that Cortland, he's never seen one before, but maybe he's heard of them. And now he's like, oh, they are really special.
Maybe, but the way
something.
It really reads to me is he doesn't realize it's special until he sees Andarna camouflage in the room. And then that's when he's like,
true.
Oh, okay, I will accept this. I really don't think so.
Okay. He's on my watch list, so.
Oh, well, yeah.
I'm suspicious, guys. But yeah, at this point, Andarna changes her color to blend with the vegetation and prove that she is unique and special. But ultimately, Cortland agrees to the terms on the condition that Halden never set foot into Deverelli again, which Violet accepts. He also adds that he expects that they will begin their search for Andarna in Umbriel, since it is the closest main isle, and then adds, if you are amenable, there is another trade I might be able to broker for you. Always with the deals. Deals in Deverelli.
Yep, Deverelli deals.
All right. That ends chapter 27. Moving on to chapter 28. Starting with the excerpt. This is a passage from a text titled Umbriel, Isle of Doon, by 2nd Lieutenant Asher Daxon. It compares Biscay's parapet test and threshing to what happens in Umbriel, which apparently is a much more treacherous process, and it implies that dragons would enjoy it there considering how ruthless a species they are. First of all, as soon as I saw Asher Daxon, the name sounded familiar to me. When you search Daxon, there are 3 excerpts written by a Colonel Daxon that come from his Guide to Excelling in the Scribes Quadrant. And what was Papa Sorengale? A scribe! So there's a few excerpts that come from him. This is what they say. So in Fourth Wing, chapter 18, the excerpt said, there's nothing more sacred than the archives. Even temples can be rebuilt, but books cannot be rewritten. And then in Iron Flame, chapter 7, it said, all tome requests at the archives of Biscayeth must be recorded and filed. Any cadet who fails to do so will be reported for dereliction of duty as well as punished for the loss of any text they failed to accurately track. Also in Iron Flame chapter 33, it says, the first time you are caught in the archives after the door seals for the evening will be the last. The complex magics put in place to preserve our texts are not compatible with life. So all of that to say, I feel pretty confident that Colonel Daxon is Papa Sorengale.
Okay, I'm totally with you on this idea. I just have to give Lorraine credit. I did not catch that at all. She's the one who told me, but as soon as she said it, I was like, wait, what? And then, I did my own little verification process, and I totally agree with this theory. Now, it's also mentioned in chapter 18 of Iron Flame when Violet and Xaden are hanging out in their room. Xaden reads the title, Guide to Excelling in the Scribe Quadrant, and Violet jokes, that one wasn't as useful as I thought it would be the first time I read it. And if this is actually her father's writing, I find that absolutely hilarious. Her scribe father wrote a book about being a scribe, trained Violet to be in the scribe quadrant. She's like, yeah, it wasn't really as helpful as I thought.
That's funny. But actually, if you think about it, it was because all of those details were really important to her navigating to get all these texts and important documents that she wasn't supposed to be accessing. You know what I mean? But anyways, so Asher Daxon was a 2nd lieutenant at the time that this excerpt for chapter 28 was written. A 2nd lieutenant is lower in rank than lieutenant colonel, which also supports the idea that this was in his younger days. I actually did verify that because I wouldn't have known that off the top of my head. No, I would not have done that. So
that's
I had to,
so good.
Google it.
Because I was actually going to say the ranking system is not super intuitive to me, so it's really easy for me to get that mixed up. So if we're wrong timeline-wise and how all the ranks work, please let us know, but nicely. Okay, we're only human. But in relation to this thought, if we are wrong about the timeline of ranks, it's also possible that Asher Daxon was maybe Asher Sorengale's father or grandfather, so still related to Violet, just not her dad. So just got to point out that possibility, but I'm really leaning towards that Asher Daxon is Asher Sorengale. I also think it's important to note throughout this entire series, not a single name has ever been repeated. Not even someone being named after a family member or a historical figure. So it really does stick out that there are 2 Ashers, and Asher is a pretty distinct name. Okay,
yes,
it's not like something that you feel like a lot of people would have,
Right.
I also think it's a little sus in the excerpts that Lorraine listed out. It was always written Colonel Daxon. But now that we've actually been introduced to Violet's dad as Asher, all of a sudden we're getting the full name Asher Daxon. And I feel like that's intentional by Rebecca Yarros to help us place that together.
So to get into the regular events of this chapter, 3 days later, Violet is back at Biscayth post-Deverelli trip sitting in battle brief with her squad. I did find it notable Professor De Vera is discussing the recent fall of Valia, which indicates that the Venom are attacking in Rovla again. It's also noted that while away on the mission to Deverelli, Signisan flyer cadets had arrived at Biscayth as well.
It's about damn time. Okay, where have they been? I also have to point something else out that's described in this part of the chapter. I'm a little nervous because I know that people have what's the word I'm looking for? They have very strong feelings and thoughts about this potential trope that I'm about to introduce.
Oh,
I'm just doing service to the podcast, so don't come for me. Violet describes, God's damn, am I tired? Every muscle aches. My stomach can't decide if it wants to eat everything or expel it all. And I'm starting to see double when I try to focus on the map. There have been several mentions of Violet's physical state so far in this book. And I know this is common in the series because of Violet's chronic illness that affects her joints and causes her chronic pain. But I feel like the descriptions throughout Onyx Storm have been a little different. Much more focused on being exhausted, her stomach being unsettled. It's a little bit different than just, her achy joints and muscles. As part of my due diligence, I must say this, and I know I'm like nervous to say it because I feel like people are really not going to like it. Is it possible that Violet is pregnant? If you go back and reread the first 30 chapters or so, there's a lot of I'm exhausted, I'm seeing double, I'm dizzy, she's really unwell. And a lot of the times it's in a context where you can explain it away, they've been flying for 24 hours, so it's really hot or humid. But her symptoms are really starting to sound like something is going on with her physically outside of her chronic illness. And again, as I just said, could be just environmentally related. To be honest, I would be shocked if this was the case. It's mentioned in Fourth Wing that both Violet and Xaden take a fertility suppressant, and we don't know anything about how that works in this world and how effective it is. But I think it's pretty safe to say they did not purposely get pregnant, but it is sticking out to me a little bit. And I obviously, the first time I was like, okay, but this time I really couldn't ignore it. It was I'm not sure if I want to eat everything or throw up. That is really how pregnancy feels. Okay.
I didn't take it like that. I really just truly interpreted it as the fact that they have been nonstop going, flying to all these places.
Yes.
Mission, back to school where they're studying and training and doing all this other stuff. So yeah, I truly read it as just her reaching the limit of her exhaustion.
Yes.
I get the
you see a little bit,
about how the description of it seems more intense or a little bit different. But I guess to our point about consent and stuff, I do think that if that was going to happen, it would probably be something they talk about, because obviously Violet was
totally
consort when that thing popped into the question.
Yeah.
She's like, we need to talk about that.
I think even if Violet and Xaden do want to have children someday, they're very young. Not to mention, life as they know it can cease to exist, right? I don't think anybody's bringing a baby in this world,
I was going to say, that's my other point, is I don't think it would fit in the plot trajectory for this series. There's just too much that they have to do to where if Violet got pregnant and was going to have a child, that would significantly change her ability to be questing around in these isles and doing all these other things and fighting Venom, you know what I mean? So,
and I want to be clear, I'm not advocating for that. I don't think it would fit the story, but I just had to say it.
Okay.
But I'm not going to start a pregnancy watch or anything. Okay, I'm not going to do any of that nonsense.
I certainly will not be on pregnancy watch, but I see what you mean about the description details and stuff. So before we get into regular details of what's going on, I thought it was hilarious that while Violet fills everyone in, Riddick is working on getting some when he starts flirting with the Signisan flyer. And Riddick's gone game for sure, because the flyer scoffs and tells him, I don't do second years. And then he comes back with, good thing I book a third. It's boom.
I
just love it.
I think that may be the hardest I've laughed the entire series. When I tell you I had to put my book down, I had to collect myself, because that is the best possible response.
Oh my gosh,
that he's getting some later, okay?
Oh,
know that worked
absolutely.
Like a charm. Hell, it worked on me.
It same. So, dang.
Oh my God.
To get back into the plot-related details, Violet tells her squad that King Cortland's secondary trade he offered to broker involved trading Violet and Xaden's services, aka powers, for weaponry. This was surprising because everyone else was under the impression that Deverelli was neutral and therefore had no weapons or army. But Violet clarifies they do have both of those things. They just keep it under the radar. Kat also asks why they would want Violet and Xaden to use their powers since Deverelli doesn't have magic, which, as we touched on, is an excellent point.
She doesn't just ask, she says, it's weird they would want her because she's scary with her lightning, but without it, which is kind of messed up, honestly. And she's like, what? You're all thinking it. And I was like, that's messed up, Kat, okay? You're not being a good squad mate.
But also, like, none of them are important without their power.
Whoa, wow.
No, I'm saying, like, to the king of Deverelli. Like, he only cares
wow,
about
Lorraine.
them. No.
Sounded like it's something a Venom would say.
He only cared about them when they demonstrated these abilities. And he's like,
true.
Oh, shit, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that's the reason. Sorry, that came out wrong, or that came out weird. Devera interrupts their conversation since they are sitting in class after all, and Violet announces that they've managed to secure diplomatic access to the Isles as a launch point for further searches. Violet also thinks to herself, I personally secured Cortland's silence on what Xaden did by promising my own like a sacrifice. Something about the wording of like a sacrifice feels weird to me. It feels a little too similar to like gifts and offerings in language like that in relation to the gods, you know? I don't know what it means, but I'm just going to point it out. Devera goes on to ask Violet to analyze the situation in Valia and why it's concerning, and Violet says that the Venon's movement southwest shows a change in strategy, meaning they somehow know about the Eurasian wards and they're moving into position for the inevitability of them falling. Bruh. Obviously, this is super concerning. We've known that they highly suspect that there's somebody in leadership or multiple people in leadership who are considered traitors to Navarre or like Venon or whatever. I also was wondering, and this is less likely in my mind, but I'm still going to point it out, could someone in Eurasia be betraying them? Honestly, I'm getting more suspicious of Markham and Melgren because they were so adamant about searching Eurasia. And what better way to either speed up the Eurasian wards falling or give information about their weaknesses than to go there and investigate them yourself? Especially because people like Markham and Melgram have much more access to information about the wards and similar things because of their ranks.
I'm thinking about who in Eurasia would betray them. And honestly, my first thought, it was Brennan. That was the first thing that went through my mind.
People do have the theory. I haven't entertained that theory very much because, I don't know, it's in the back of my mind. But I haven't found enough stuff to be like, yes, definitely. But within the fandom and community, of course, there's talk about Brennan being Benin.
Or Nayland. Basically, Brennan's whole backstory situation is suspicious and lacking its detail and clarification. We're not going to go down this rabbit hole because we don't have anything new to offer here with evidence. But honestly, as soon as you said that, the first name that flashed in my mind was Brennan, and again, I love Brennan. I'm not saying he's a traitor. I don't think he is. But there are obviously a lot of other people in Eurasia, like the Assembly, any of those, not to mention just a ton of other people in Eurasia that could be doing that.
Right.
But so I'm going to ignore that because I don't want to think about that. I do think you're right, though. I know we talked about this in a previous episode. I'm still leaning towards Panchek being the Venon in leadership or working with the Venon, but I think Markham is a close second.
Yes. So I'm telling you, something about Markham is off to me.
Well, he's not trustworthy. I mean, he's already proven that by his entire existence. So
he has the integrity of a rat, after all. So.
That's right.
But yeah, anyways, we're on Venon leadership watch for sure. We fast forward another week, apparently, and Violet is increasingly worried about Xaden and how they are expected to leave for Umbriel in another week's time. Violet thinks 8 days should have been enough for the red around his eyes to have faded, unless he's progressed to ASEM. Can't ignore that. I mean, truly, what is the progression to new Venom levels, and how many times of drawing power directly does it take to level up in rank?
Well, isn't it how many times or how much power you draw, right? Is there a threshold?
True. Yeah, that too.
You know, who knows?
Also, this thought just occurred to me. If we are running with the theory about channeling from the sky versus the ground, and then Andarna's breed being different because of that, then I do wonder how or if that affected Xaden when he drew power from Violet's conduit. Does that make a difference for Venon?
Oh,
like what the source of the power that they're drawing from is.
Well,
I mean, I guess the implication is that they would still want it even more because one of my details with the Andarna theory was the venom that stabbed Violet, being like, we could open you up and see all this power that you have, like from the sky or whatever. So I guess in either case, they still want it. I don't know, just this thought. Violet and her squad have been working overtime, training, and studying, and they all continue to do so while they sit watching Signet sparring class today, which is currently being led by Professor Carr. Apparently, it only took Violet and Dane 2 evenings to decode the 6 passcodes for each of those books Norelle gave them.
And no insight on that at all. It's kind of disappointing. I thought it was going to be like, they're going to drag that out for the rest of the book. And instead it was like, oh, we did it in 2 nights. Okay, great.
I agree. I totally thought it was going to take them longer, but...
It's probably good that it didn't. Like, we got enough going on. We don't need to draw that out.
True. I don't need to speculate about that. I don't have the brain capacity to do.
I really can't.
We also learned that Mira has taken personal leave, which is odd because this is the first time that she's taken personal leave, like literally ever. So where is she going?
And like, what could she possibly need to do right now in the middle of a war with Venom? I thought that was a little odd.
I don't know. But there are several different books that everyone is reading, and they include the following. So Riddick.
When Riddick reads, he's Riddick.
Riddick reads the continent's most redacted volume on Umbriel's warlike customs. Ree is reading a book on weather patterns throughout the Isles. Bodhi has a book on early fables from Breivik, and it's noted that he's looking for tales of dark wielders cured by love or good deeds or dancing naked under a full moon after drinking the venom of a rare snake only found on the farthest isle during a lunar eclipse or something. That line feels important to remember. We already talked about, this possibility of love being involved with a cure or delaying venomness earlier in this episode. But again, we also know that in the chapter 26 excerpt that poison was one method used to kill venom in the study. And a venom of a rare snake being mentioned in here, venom, poison, still a connection.
Plus the detail about how the Valerina moths can be poisonous as well. I mean, there's something to flora and fauna being utilized.
Also, farthest isle kingdoms.
Oh, yeah, totally.
Yeah. Bookmark that line, guys. This is back up or something. I
Lorraine
don't know how
very
or why.
Passionate.
I do. So anyways, Violet reads a part of her father's book on how trial by combat served as different levels of entrance to Umbriel's court. This, too, feels like it's going to come back up later when they go to Umbriel. I also thought it was interesting that Violet notes how in this book her father's observations are sharp, almost clinical, but lack his usual insight, and that there is a difference between this book, which he wrote when he was 23 and straight out of the scribe quadrant, and then she compares that to the manuscript that she found in his office. So this has to be the book that this chapter's excerpt came from. But I also wonder if this difference in writing signifies that at this time, maybe Asher was still of the mindset Navarre could be trusted. So he was reporting as was expected of him as a scribe, if that makes sense. But, at some point, things shifted. Then the way that he writes everything becomes much more coded. Right. So Violet also wonders when her father would have visited the Isles or have had the time to transcribe rudimentary dictionaries, which is a great question because if he had gone to the Isles, did he do so secretly on his own? Or was it sanctioned research on behalf of Navarre? We are all supposed to be under the impression that Navarre wasn't in contact with the Isle Kingdoms, but we see that that was a lie because of what Halden reveals. So now I'm just confused. Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know what's true, what's not.
Okay. I just had this thought sparked in real time. Ooh. So very frequently in Iron Flame throughout this book, a scribe often accompanies a group of people to report on a mission. So what if people were sent to the Isles to barter, negotiate, or trade, and Asher, being a young scribe, was sent on the missions with them to document what's occurring. And so he was spending time in the Isles on Navarrian business and then also documented his findings and observations while he was there in addition to the mission.
Oh, no, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Still in that case, though, I'm assuming it would have had to be something like pretty secret, right? Like it would have been something that nobody could know
super
about what was
classified.
going on. Yes, totally.
Yeah.
So, wow, things are getting crazy. Okay. Finally, it's noted that Quinn is reading a volume that Queen Mariah sent on venom and their medicinal uses.
Ew.
I read that and I was like, bitch, what? Like venom had been used medicinally?
Like they're grinding up venom corpses.
Dude, oh my gosh. Guys, I'll be honest, when I was typing my notes, I think I was just very tired and exhausted.
Brain
of, thinking
fatigue.
so much. Yeah, brain fatigue for real. And when I read that, I was like, okay, I'm tapped out. I cannot think about this. I don't know what this means. It's just king prawning everywhere all the time. Why would you?
Why? What possible medicinal
medicine?
Purposes? Yeah, no.
To cure something? I don't know. Ugh, too much mental gymnastics. That feels important to remember, but I don't know why, and I have no theories about it.
And we don't want to, okay? We don't want to.
Okay, I did lie, though. I did come up with one thought. I was wondering if this was related to the mysterious fever that Lilith had when she was pregnant with Violet and why Violet's hair is silver.
I want to say Rebecca Gross has publicly stated there is a very distinct reason her hair is silver, and that will be revealed with time. Not sure if it gets revealed in this book, but I would really like that mystery to be solved for me. Overall, for this scene, I loved that literally every single member of the squad is contributing to helping research. In between each sentence, it was like, Bridget's reading this, Marin's reading this, Imogen, Quinn, everyone. I love that it's really, truly a group effort. Fourth wing, forever and always, baby. Fourth wing.
Violet starts thinking about how, considering how difficult it was for all of them to get these books, it's wild to think that Garrick could probably just walk straight from here to wherever Queen Mariah's library is. And this prompts her to ask Bodhi, what's your second signet? So when I first read this conversation, I will admit I got super excited. I was like, hell yeah, Bodhi's getting a second signet. I was all on board. But after discussing with Addison, it seems that initial reaction was jumping the gun. So let's break it down.
Poor Lorraine. I had to rain on her parade. I do that so often.
No, I mean, it's fair, though. I think it's meant to be kind of ambiguous, but in this case, I ultimately do agree after talking with you. So Bodhi glances in Garrick's direction after Violet asks him that, and then he responds, don't have one. Violet then asks, as in you don't have one that I get to know about but will eventually see wield, or don't have one, have one. Bodhi gives a wry smile and then says don't have one, just like Xaden. I had to look up what wry smile means because I was a little confused about the context, and I think I thought wry means one thing, but once you actually look it up, it changes how you interpret that wry smile. So a wry smile is usually given to express that you find a bad or difficult situation slightly amusing. So, it's not that he's given, a smirk smile like Xaden likes to do.
He's like, I know something you don't know smile,
Right. And if you just look at the smile part, then you're like, oh, he's, keeping something. But the fact that it's noted that it's a wry smile, I think shifts your understanding of that. And then also following that, he's like, if I do have one, will I get to go? And he gets excited again. And so I think that shift is what was I think he was being genuine in saying that he didn't have one. I do think Bodhi knows that Garrick has a second signet because he looks at him before answering.
Agreed.
But Addison also reminded me that no one except for Violet knows that Xaden has a second signet because being an intrinsic is not only illegal in Navarre, but it also poses a huge risk for anyone who knows that he is an intrinsic. So with that being said, it seems like at this time, Bodhi truly does not have a second signet. I'm not going to totally take it off the table. I think there's a little bit of room for possibility that maybe Bodhi's lying, or it could also mean that this conversation is meant to foreshadow that he could manifest a second signet later. But at this time, it doesn't seem like he has one.
I agree with your analysis. I don't think Bodhi has one, especially in the context of the conversation. He really does not think that Xaden has one. I mean, that was the thing in Iron Flame. Literally no one could know. Right. I do have to add, I think it's highly unlikely he will manifest one at this point because he's already a third year. And I feel like if he was going to, he would have already. That's not to say it can't happen. We don't really know a lot about second signets and that of how quickly they manifest after the first. Can it be later? Can it be delayed? Is it prompted by a huge emotional thing? We don't really know really hardly anything about it. But it does seem unlikely to me at this point that he would manifest one. But if he did, that would be great.
Okay, but I also thought it was interesting, though, that Violet jokes that she was selfishly hoping Bodhi might have a second signet that would do something cool, like keep Halden from speaking. Now, whether that ends up applying to Bodhi, not sure. But I am going to catalog it as a possible signet power for someone in the future. This possibility to stop someone from speaking or whatever, or like a speech-related signet. So the squad is distracted by the arrival of the first years, Link, Spaylor, Evelyn, Sloane, Auric, and Kai, who declare that they want to help with the mission. Several second and third years argue against them helping, insisting that their first year was hard enough as it is, which, fair. Sloane insists that they want to help, and the conversation gets sidetracked when Dane points out that according to Professor Carr, Sloane has been refusing to train her signet. Now, first off, while she's arguing with Dane, there are a couple times noting how she blushes. And I was like, ooh, is this some early foreshadowing for a romance between Sloane and Dane?
Okay, so God Watch, Shem Watch, Magic Watch, and Darna Watch, all that other shit, I don't care about. This is what I live for. Relationship watch. Love watch. Okay. My relationship radar was going off. I was like, oh my God. Like, I was so excited. Especially because Violet thinks I lift my brows at the look she shoots him, mostly because I can't tell if she wants to stab him in his seat or gets cut off. Okay. So clearly Violet is picking up on this as well. And then I have to point out, Violet's thought gets cut off, and the next word in the text is fuck. It's from Garrick and not related, but when you read it together, it totally feels like a little jokey joke Rebecca Yarros is putting in there.
100%. She totally was insinuating something. 100%. I agree with that, and it was hilarious.
Thank you, Rebecca Yarros, for that. And now I'm like, Dane and Sloane, Sloane and Dane.
Everyone is concerned by this, referring to Sloane not training her signet. But when Violet asked why she won't train, I thought Sloane's response was both heartbreaking and interesting. Sloane says, would you train if all you did was destroy things? I just want to help in a way that doesn't suck the magic out of something. So first of all, it's pretty clear Sloane is still struggling a lot with what her signet does and how she was forced to use it against Lilith to imbue her power into the Word Stone. I would imagine taking the power out of someone and killing them being one of the very first ways that you use your power would be really tough to deal with psychologically, even if ultimately that act was in service to saving everybody else.
Especially when you think about what's going on in the world around Sloane. The biggest threat to life as they know it are venom, which literally suck the magic out of things. So it's pretty easy to see why she would not like the idea of doing anything that associates her with them, anything that's even vaguely similar. I imagine there's some fear of training her signet. What she's like, what if I pull too much? What if I pull too far? What if I kill someone, hurt someone? What if I become venom because I can't stop myself, right? And so I get that there's like this really big fear around it. And we know that siphons are very rare. The only other siphon discussed is Nayland, and who knows what happened with him. But it's not like that's a common signet walking around. She's kind of isolated and alone with this signet.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. In addition, this prompted an idea when Sloane said, suck the magic out of something. What would happen if Sloane siphoned a venom? Could she draw out all the magic and return them to a normal pre-magic human state? Or would it like ultimately kill the venom? We've definitely had this discussion before about how being a siphon feels similar to being a venom, but obviously the distinction between siphons and venom being that the dragons buffer the power behind a siphon signet. And so that prevents the siphon from turning venom. I don't know. It's just like a thought experiment. Overall, I do think that being a siphon is going to come back up again. Something about this particular signet feels very important in a major way.
I agree.
Ultimately, Violet agrees to let the first years help and assigns each of them some text to write up reports on for them. The rest of the first years leave, but Auric stands back to ask Violet about the mission with specific concerns over Halden, since the scribes hadn't released a mission report yet after it being almost a couple weeks at this point. Before he leaves, he squints at Violet and asks, are you in over your head, Violet? Auric definitely has an idea of how Halden tends to behave, so I think he has that context. But it is interesting that he, in particular, feels like the time it's taking to hear about everything is suspicious, I guess.
I absolutely think there's something more to this. Honestly, I can't explain it. It's just a gut feeling. But there's something about the way the question is phrased and the way he narrows his eyes. And I really wonder if he's starting to suspect about Xaden because Arik is super observant. That's one of the things about his character. He just seems more mature and kind of more advanced in a lot of ways than a lot of the other first years. And I feel like there's this trope in fantasy books where there's a conversation and then it's always described they gave a knowing look. And it's the knowing look that's always a dead giveaway that they know more than they're letting on. And that's the vibe I'm getting here. He's feeling Violet out so she can see how she's going to respond. I don't know. It just made like something tingle in the back of my mind. I don't have a good like speculatoration on that. Channeling my inner Glinda there.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree that he's very perceptive for sure. So what does Arik know? Violet turns back to her squad to find them debating over the logistics of traveling between the various Isle kingdoms. Their main concern is how they won't have enough time to search all the larger and smaller isles and report back to Navarre in between. They also have to factor in the Griffins, who will not realistically be able to handle all of the flights that they would need to take going back and forth. Kat mentions the names of some of the other isles, which include Hidotis, Zelna, and Loisum. Obviously, the names of these isles strongly invoke the names of the gods and goddesses that we've met in this series so far. And this prompts me to wonder if perhaps each of these other isles is named after the gods or goddesses that they worship. For example, Hidotis mainly worships Hidian, Zelna worships Zinal, etc. Also, at this time, I would like to pause and take like a geographic inventory. The Isle Kingdoms consist of 5 larger isles and 13 smaller ones. It seems like the 5 larger isles are Deverelli, Umbriol, Hidotis, Zelna, and Loisum. And then we have yet to learn what the names of the minor isles are.
Yes, that's not explicitly stated which ones are considered major and minor, but based on just generic descriptions kind of in how they're talking about how they're going to fly to certain isles, I would agree with that.
Okay. So then, if you start making associations between the names of like different land masses with gods and goddesses, this is how they seem to be connected. So, main continent, Amari, Queen of Gods, thus why Narelle has been referring to their group coming from the continent as Amaralis. Next, you have Umbriel, where the Dune, goddess of strength and war, is associated with. Next, we have Hidotis, who worships Hidian, the god of wisdom. Zelna worships Zinal, god of luck. Loisum, most likely loyal, goddess of love. And then you have Deverelli, whose name doesn't necessarily connect or feel similar enough to a god or a goddess to connect them. So I'm leaving them as unassociated for now. And then you have Malik, the god of death, who is also unassociated so far. But we do know that there is the Bay of Malik on the map.
Yes, I think you're spot on with all of that. The only thing that doesn't make sense to me is Umbriel, Dune, goddess of strength and war, because I'm like, the names don't match. Not that they necessarily have to, but like the other ones are spot on, right? Hidotis, Hadion, Zelena or Zelna, whatever, Zinal, Loisum and Loyal, right? All of those make sense to me. So that's the only one I'm kind of like, but I mean, we know from the context they've given us in studying for the Isle that they're related.
Right. The conversation is interrupted by none other than Xaden, who has finally returned from his venom recovery in Erasia. Violet, of course, is extremely relieved to see that the whites of his eyes are clear, though she does note that something about the color of his eyes is off. And of course, hold on to that, because that's going to come back up shortly. As they converse with a combination of both out loud and mind-to-mind communication, Violet mentally says, "I miss this," referring to the bond, but then thinks to herself, in terms of intimacy, this is even better. And then Xaden responds mentally, then sex. Obviously, this immediately piqued my interest because, as Violet notes, this was not just him reading her intentions, but instead, it says, "My eyes widen. Has he been honing his signet like Riddick?" I don't want to get too excited, but this feels like pretty solid confirmation that Xaden can, in fact, read thoughts now, not just intentions, and has been able to, most likely. And that really makes me question many of their interactions, especially in the last set of chapters when they're at Viscount Takaris' place in Corden.
Oh, I don't care what the book says. This is canon for me now. He absolutely can read intention in minds. There's no doubt in my mind. I mean, obviously we need like the big revelation of Violet being like, you can read minds. And they'd be like, yeah, I can, but
Right, for Zayden
me,
himself
yes,
to
he
confirm
can.
it. Yeah.
Absolutely. Now, the only question that's still lingering in regard to that is, can he do this because his signet is being honed or because he's a Venin? That's the question.
Yes, I think so too. So, Zaddy's back, but they are still under Professor Student rules in Biscayeth, and Zayden ends up pulling Garrick aside, and Violet notes the sun catches on the amber fleck in Zayden's eyes as he nods before walking away. Amber. Hold on to that, because I'm going to lump my thoughts about it into Violet's comment with Zayden. So realizing that they couldn't afford to waste any time between the Oration wards and Zayden's situation, Violet makes a whole group announcement that they should fuck the rules, and rather than come back to report after Umbriel, they don't come back at all until they find Indarna's kind. The squad ultimately agrees with her, and then Bodhi pulls Violet aside and she confesses what she noticed about the gold flecks in Zayden's eyes now being amber rather than gold. So, in response to the note, the gold in Zayden's eyes are now amber, I actually did a little search, and the only other person that has been mentioned that has amber-colored eyes is Brennan. This is pointed out in Chapter 2 of Iron Flame, and it was within the same context that Violet also notes the rune-shaped scar on Brennan's palm and the whole Naolin didn't fail, but it cost him everything line, etc., etc. As we discussed earlier, I wasn't previously of the strong belief that Brennan was Venin because I just didn't feel like at this point there was enough evidence about his character and how he was behaving to necessarily support that. But of course, that doesn't mean that we've forgotten about that. It's a little weird. The rune's weird. Brennan being seemingly saved from death. All the circumstances about the whole situation are just kind of odd. However, when you do add that Brennan's eyes are amber and knowing Zayden's eyes are described as amber, it does make you a little bit more suspicious.
When Lorraine brought this up to me off the pod first, I did a little research on the eyes. So Lilith is described as having light-colored eyes. Asher has hazel eyes. Mira has warm brown eyes. Violet has hazel eyes. And Brennan has amber. And so I don't know how genetics work in this world. I'm going to assume it's similar to in the real world. But amber does seem like a possible color. But what if he had brown eyes that turned amber from drawing? I don't know. I'm just going to, throw out the little details there. Again, as we said, we don't think that Brennan is Venin. It's fun to speculate, but we're just going to put a pin in that until we get anything with Brennan, because sort of kind of related, I miss Brennan. I like when Violet and Mira and Brennan are all together, and at this rate, it kind of seems like Brennan won't really be in this book very much. He's just in Eratia, doing Oration things with the Assembly and I guess whatever that requires for the war effort, so I am beginning to lose hope that we'll get anything with Brennan, and we're definitely not going to get anything with Brennan and Naolin and the backstory there.
Yeah. Book 4 or book 5 situation on that one.
Yes.
But anyways, in addition, we've been on Gem Watch, and in researching other gems and their connections to mythology, I did come across amber. So in Norse mythology, Freya is the goddess of love, beauty, war, fertility, sex, gold, and divination. Freya had cried tears that turned into gold and amber when her husband was away, and amber is also affiliated with electricity and light. And the word for electricity is derived from the Greek name for amber, electron, and the stone, once believed to be made of congealed sunlight. And that was sacred to the Greek god Apollo. And then for a different cultural context, the Chinese believed amber to be the soul of the tiger transformed after death. There's a couple interesting words in there that kind of pique your interest. I mean, electricity and light. Violet's electricity and light.
Okay, yeah.
Soul of an animal, in this case, transformed after death.
Oh, I'm glad you connected the dots for me on that, because I didn't get that until you said it.
Okay. I was like, the soul being transformed after death?
Now that you say it, I'm like, oh, okay.
Venin, very Venin thing. I don't know. Anyways, all of this is compiled into Gem Watch, okay? Something's going on with all these things. But I do find it really interesting that the gold in Zayden's eyes is now amber after drawing from Violet's power. We know one way her power manifests is in the form of lightning, and when you consider that Indarna may have been the source of Violet's ability to have any power in Deverelli, you're just questioning everything. But anyways, nothing is also for certain, and you could also just say that amber is the result of red from being venom mixing with gold.
That's what I went with, to be totally honest.
One thing you can count on from me is a lot of theories and speculations. To get back to the combo with Bodhi, he gives her 2 vials, a serum, and an antidote. Based on the conversation, I interpreted the implication to be that she might have to use it on Xaden. Is that what you figured as well?
Yeah, I don't really know why else that she would need it. I think it's just she got really scared by what happened in Deverelli, and so she wants something that a fail-safe, I'll say.
I also find it interesting that as much as Bodhi wants to go on the mission, he insists Garrick needs to go with the quest squad to Unreal in case they don't find a cure for Xaden. I was a little confused by this. Is this because Bodhi is Xaden's cousin and therefore needs to stay because he would be next in line for the Tirish throne if anything happens to Xaden? Or, I mean, are they also trying to imply something with Garrick's ability as a distance wielder? I guess I don't really see how that makes a difference unless he can, like, bring people with him. But I was just a little confused about why Garrick has to be the one to go with Xaden.
So the short answer to both of your questions is yes. The long answer is absolutely Bodhi needs to stay to represent Tyrannodor's best interests, especially because we know King Tauri and most of leadership are not big fans of Xaden and people from Tyrannodor in general. So it's good for them to have as many layers of protection for the dukedom of Tyrannodor, because if Bodhi dies and Xaden, I feel like Tauri will just put a pup, there. So I think that's a big part of why they want Bodhi to stay.
Okay.
Not to mention, I think Garrick's distance wielding could come in handy in many ways if he needs to take Xaden somewhere to isolate him, or if he needs to save Violet from Xaden if Xaden loses it. Now, the hiccup in that theory is we don't know if Garrick can, quote unquote, walk with somebody.
Yes.
We know he can walk with his dragon. I'm going to say he probably can walk with somebody.
Or it's going to advance to that.
Exactly. Yes. Like through need. He'll be like, I've never done it before. I've only done it a short distance. But I've had a suspicion since this idea was introduced that he can walk with people, because when you think back to Fourth Wing and Iron Flame, there's a lot of questions about like how Xaden is delivering weapons at these great distances in such short time frames. Like how is he able to be away from the quadrant? And Garrick is always with him. And so this is just speculation. We don't have that confirmed. But I think that Garrick can or will be able to, and that's why Bodhi wants him to go.
Oh, and also, just to give another example of Garrick walking with somebody, Crod, like in chapter
10. Yeah, he can do it with his dragon.
Yeah. So, okay, that makes sense. Their conversation gets interrupted when the sparring that's been going on in the background takes a turn. Second Wing's wing leader, Timon Kagaso, overwhelms the second year he's been sparring against with his fire. And in a completely surprising turn of events, the second year drains from the ground and turns right in front of everyone. And I was like, oh,
that was wild.
I was not expecting that to happen.
No, not at all.
Violet does wonder some important questions. She asks, has she already been Venin or did she just turn? And if the second year cadet had already been a Venin, would Xaden have sensed her? In this case, I think the second year just turned in this instance. It seems like she was down bad against Timon. Carr wasn't helping her other than, yelling at her to wield. I wouldn't be surprised if she just drew from the ground out of desperation.
I'm inclined to believe she was turning just in that moment because I think Violet's thought of Xaden would have sensed her is accurate. And this is like the way it's described, like she puts her hand to the ground and screams. Maybe she's screaming because like the current she's pulling feels stronger or different or something, or it's painful. I don't know, but I think she's turning right then and there.
Ultimately, this event is put to an end quickly when Colonel Panchak orders Professor Carr to kill the second year with an alloy-hilted dagger.
She gone. No trial, no questions. Out of there.
Bye. Yeah.
Bye.
Dang. Anyways, that concludes our assembly meeting. And now we just have our favorite moments to share. Wow.
Feels weird to jump into favorite moments on that note. Well, here are my favorite parts.
Here we go.
So one of my first favorite moments is from Xaden and Violet's spicy time. And I like when he says, does that sound like something you'd be interested in?
Oh, yes,
I was like, yes, it would. Addison is also interested in that, so we'll just keep it moving.
I also had one that I liked from Xaden, and it's when they're in Deverelli and introduces Violet as the consort, and Violet's like, consort? We aren't married. And Xaden responds, I've noticed, but girlfriend is missing that permanent tone.
Ooh, something about a man that's committed just really, does it.
Yep.
I also love when the squad is outside the door after spicy time And when they look in, Zane goes, yes, the table is broken. Now what do you need?
Yes. That whole scene was hilarious. And just
It
like
really was.
getting the armoire brought up again and like just
Oh my
broken
God.
furniture and stuff. Ugh, everybody knew. Everybody knew every single time, all the time, you know? My next favorite one was related to Andarna. And it's when Violet tells King Courtland, Andarna doesn't eat our allies. It's a whole thing her elders are trying to teach her. But you know how adolescents are.
Oh, yes. I love that one. I think I forgot to write that one down. I love the little callback to, we do not eat our allies.
Yeah.
Similarly, I love when Terrence says, I will not stand for you being devoured by a house cat. As he talks about giant killer panthers.
Yeah. My last two are like all from the same scene, but I like the description of Andarna with one of the panthers in her mouth, and it says Andarna even has her lips puckered so the little cat doesn't get drenched in dragon saliva.
Aww.
And then, of course, along the same line, as Andarna's like waiting with the panther in her mouth, she tells Violet, I'm starting to drool.
I loved the excerpt in Lilith's words, sometimes diplomacy is best served at sword point. And I was like, yep, it is.
Sure is.
Classic of all classics. Who did not absolutely go feral for this line? Good thing I fuck like a third. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah.
And last but not least, I love when Arg and Violet are talking and he asks how Halden behaved. And Violet says, Halden was Halden. He did Halden things and caused Halden-style ramification, none of which are your fault. And I don't know why. I just feel like that was a really good way to sum up Halden's actions.
Halden doing anything.
Halden doing Halden things.
Anyways, so that officially concludes our episode. Thank you all for joining us for another episode of the Book Dumb Fantasy podcast. As always, we are so glad you found us, so please leave us a review, subscribe to the podcast, and follow us on Instagram or YouTube to keep up with us on a daily basis. That's all we've got for you guys today.
So stay violent.
And we'll catch you all next week. Bye.
Bye. And stay tuned for some bloopers. They should have left him there. Knowing what I know now, they should have left him.
Oh my gosh.
Fed him to those damn tigers.
Just kind of confusing to read, or there's some ambiguity, or Violet stops and thinks, Violet steps in and thinks, Violet steps in and says, I may have some mixed feelings about Dane. Or no, she thinks that. Never mind. Oh, God, okay.
I just have to play devil's advocate. Okay, so I totally agree with you. These are what oh my gosh, okay. I think the description of his shadows being wispies.
Ooh, yeah.
Okay. I think the wispies.
And then adds, if you are, is it amenable or amenable?
I think you can say either. I say amenable, but I think amenable is totally fine.
Oh, okay. If you are, okay.
You psyched yourself out now, didn't you?
I did it. Yeah. Okay. Reread the Bodhi note.
All right, you crazy snake dancer.
I'm telling you, I'm on to something. Okay.
I wrote, I life my browns. I life my browns. Wow. I messed that up so bad.
I life my browns.
I life my browns.